We look forward to meeting the new Deputy Mayor in City Hall soon and scrutinising her plans for London's transport. The Mayor's letter explains that he will write separately regarding the post of Deputy Chair of Transport for London in due course. Finally, I would like to invite the Mayor to say a few words about Dame Tessa Jowell, who sadly passed away at the weekend.
Good morning, Chair and Assembly members. Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to take time to pay tribute to someone who's a friend and a colleague, not only to me, but to many people here today and across London. Dame Tessa Jowell. Tessa was a towering figure in London and national politics. The way she conducted herself and the way she did politics, always with respect, dignity and compassion, is an inspiration, I hope, to us all. More than anyone else, she made the dream of bringing the Olympics to our great city a reality. With Sure Start, she saw how communities would be better as a result of early intervention and support for families, even after she was diagnosed with cancer. She used it as an opportunity to campaign for improved research and treatment for others. To me, she was a friend, and to many of us, she was more than a mentor. She was like a big sister, a wise, older sister. I know all our thoughts go out to her family during this difficult time, and I think I can speak for us all and for many other Londoners across London when I say we'll miss her enormously. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you. The Mayor mentioned Dame Tessa Jowell's compassion, and a lot has been said over the past few days about Tessa's kindness, as well as her generosity, insight and humour. This is a testament to the many individual lives she touched personally over a long and hugely successful political career. This included my own life, as although I'm speaking as Deputy Leader of the Labour Group, I was Chair of her constituency Labour Party for almost 5 years. Tessa's political work touched the lives of people far beyond those she encountered day to day. Sure Start centres, now regrettably dwindling in numbers, can be a vital lifeline for struggling families and provide new mums with an opportunity to access a community, services and advice during what can be an extremely lonely and vulnerable time. Her vision and conviction for the Olympic Games pushed through London's bid and completely transformed the city, the country even, during the summer of 2012 and East London for a generation. The Olympics demonstrate how Tessa could get people on board, including those with very different political perspectives, through her ability to enthuse and inspire. Her sense of kindness and common sense was fundamental to Sure Start. But kindness alone doesn't push through groundbreaking schemes like Sure Start. You don't convince a Prime Minister that London should bid for the Olympics just by being enthusiastic. Tessa was no pushover. She was skilled and a determined politician with the inner strength to pursue causes that she cared about deeply, sometimes at great personal cost. Nothing demonstrates that inner strength more than Tessa's work in the final months of her life, campaigning for better treatment of brain cancer at a time when many would retreat inwards. So I pay tribute to the Tessa Jowell who was kind, who many people have mentioned how nice and friendly she was, but who was also strong, wily and shrewd. Thank you.
Assembly Member Bacon.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On behalf of the Conservative Group, I'd like to add my tribute to that of Assemblyman Twycross and the Mayor. Tessa Jowell served for 23 years, her constituency of Dulwich and West Norwood, served for 13 years as a government minister, including 6 as a Secretary of State at the DCMS. But of course, what she will be most known for is the work that she did on the Olympics. And the thing with history is that whenever you look back on things, you think that the events that came to pass were inevitable, but of course they weren't. And Dame Tessa put her weight behind the Olympic bid as far back as 2002, and the context at that time is that nobody thought that it would be possible that London would win the Olympic bid. Everybody assumed that Paris would get it. She was almost at that time a lone voice in government, and without the effort and input that she put in, it's very much doubtful that we would have won what turned out to be an absolutely fantastic event, and is widely regarded as the greatest Olympic Games ever. And I think, as much as anything else, I think that will be her political tribute. But of course, she's more than just that. I think that, particularly in her passing, the dignity that she showed. I challenge anybody who witnessed or watched back the final speech that she made in Parliament, where she talked about living with cancer, not dying of cancer. And the standing ovation that she received rightly from the people who were there, who heard it firsthand, says an awful lot about the human being that we are discussing. Her passing, I think, London's lost one of its brightest stars, a woman of great integrity and dignity. I was fortunate to meet her only once, but it was for a few hours during the Olympic Games. She gave me, one or two other Assembly members and a couple of MPs a tour of the park, and she was tremendously generous with her time. She was very, very courteous, very, very pleasant, and I liked her very much. And I have to say that I was deeply saddened by her passing, as I'm sure we all were. Thank you, Chairman.
Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite a new Assembly member. I wasn't here for the Olympics and the close work that Tessa Jowell did on that. That the Assembly members before me have told me how open she was to working with the Assembly, how she went beyond what the rules at the time for ministers allowed in engaging with us. And I think the Olympics, as everyone has said, was an absolutely huge achievement that she deserves a lot of credit for. I did meet her on a number of occasions, usually backstage on TV studios or panels and things where I was speaking. And I commented on this before we knew she was ill. I've told this to many people, how friendly, warm and encouraging, above all, she was always to me when I saw her. It's not always the case that that happens with opposition, senior politicians, but she absolutely always was brilliant to me and really lovely. I hear the same from all the tributes that I've read and all the tributes that I've heard, and I want to give my absolute condolences to everybody here who knew her and to her family, and I know that she's a great loss to politics. Thanks.
Assembly Member Whittle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to add our voice to these tributes to Dame Tessa. I never knew her, I never met her, but in some ways it means what I'm saying is more meaningful because I saw her through the television and, you know, out in public, like probably most of us. And what shone through for me, apart from the fact that she was such a dignified character, such a gracious character, was a sense of public service. And in an era where basically politicians, let's face it, are thought of in a very low way and as being very, very cynical, I think a sense of public service is something that you just, if it's genuine, absolutely comes through and shines through. And I think it did with her. So anybody who has that, it's an enormous loss when they go. So I'm very pleased to add my name to these tributes. Thank you.
Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you very much. I knew Tessa Jowell for around 20 years because I live in Southwark and she was one of our MPs, and I stood against her actually back in 2001 in the general election. And I found her hugely friendly, supportive of me as a woman. Didn't matter I was a different party, encouraging me to go on and do things in public life. And following that, as a cabinet member in Southwark, I worked really closely with her to deliver a new secondary school on Peckham Rye, a school that had been much needed and wanted, but by the time we got it to planning, those parents who wanted that school had got their children elsewhere, and we found we had local opposition, but we knew this school was needed, so we worked together. I remember chatting with her on the phone, plotting how we were going to make that planning meeting work, how we could make sure we had the residents there to support it, and in the end we got that through planning, and now a very successful, thriving secondary school. We've talked about the Olympics, and of course that's her huge legacy, but it's the Paralympics as well, and to have had the greatest Paralympics that we've ever seen must not be forgotten. I last saw Tessa just after she had lost the nomination as Labour Mayor, and we had a really good talk about how she had this vision, really, of wanting to talk about how we make London better and to put party politics and personalities aside, to have an election about ideas and not tribalism. And obviously that didn't happen, but, you know, I think that is something for us all to reflect on. But most of all for me, she was such a champion for women in politics, for women in all walks of life. And of course our thoughts are with her family, who spoke so wonderfully on the radio earlier in the week. Such a dignified woman and such a loss to London and the country.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask the Assembly to note the recommendation set out in item 2, which is to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests or other relevant interests where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting. Agree that? Thank you very much. Would you please formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 9th of March 2018 to the 3rd of March 2018? Thank you. The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Val Shawcross, who is retiring and so stepping down from her role as Deputy Mayor for Transport. For someone who's been involved in London politics for so many, many years, it speaks volumes that no one has a bad word to say about Val, even amongst Assembly members. She's hugely respected across political divides, and she's done an exceptional job as an Assembly member for 16 years and as Deputy Mayor for the last 2 years. With her significant expertise, she's helped to transform London's transport system, making it greener, more accessible and more affordable for millions of Londoners. I know Assembly members will join me in wishing her the very best for the future. Since we last met, Chair, I've launched a number of new strategies, programmes and initiatives to improve the lives of Londoners. This includes distributing over £1 million to support 43 local anti-knife crime projects across London, inviting community groups, youth centres and schools to bid for funding through our new £45 million Young Londoners Fund, which will help young people at risk of being caught up in crime, launching a new plan to tackle the lack of women in senior positions, the largest scale programme of its kind in the public sector, and announcing the first ever City Hall dedicated programme to build a new council housing, with the ambition to start building 10,000 new council homes over the next 4 years. And today I'm pleased to announce new powers to combat dangerous taxi and private hire activity. The majority of taxi and private hire drivers, Chair, provide a good and safe service for Londoners. But drivers who don't have a valid licence or are breaching the terms of their licence shouldn't be on the streets. That's why we've now made it possible for our compliance officers to pull over vehicles and to carry out more enforcement operations without a police presence. This will save the Met Police valuable time and resources. The safety of Londoners is my number one priority, and having already quadrupled the number of compliance officers since I became Mayor, I'm delighted they'll now have the powers they need to take action against dangerous taxi and private hire activity. I look forward to answering your questions this morning.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Prince.
Mr. Mayor, good morning. I don't know if there's an oversight. Maybe you might want to comment on a certain marriage that's coming up at the weekend.
Well, can I just say thank you for your question, Senator Prince. I suspect most Londoners, if not all Londoners, are looking forward to the good weather this weekend, and it will shine, hopefully, on the happier couple. I'm sure all of us wish Prince Harry and Meghan Markle a fantastic day and all the best in the future. For those of us who weren't invited to the wedding, I'm sure we'll be watching on TV and listening to on the radio and watching the people gathering in Windsor. I would just say this, just worth bearing in mind that during the course of this weekend, not just Windsor, but London will be on display to the entire world, and I'm sure we'll do London proud and Harry and Meghan proud as well. I wish them all the best of luck.
No, that's a perfect segue, as they say, Mr. Mayor. I think you'll agree that this is a fantastic day for London and the country, and that many millions of Londoners will be celebrating. Also, hopefully, many millions of Londoners will be celebrating when Chelsea win the FA Cup. Not that I'm a Chelsea supporter, but I'm a Londoner first. And so it's going to be a very, very busy weekend, as you know, and as you quite rightly say, we will be on show to the rest of the world. With that in mind, Mr. Mayor, would you consider suspending the maintenance work that is going to be taking place on numerous tube lines at the weekend that will possibly damage our reputation and certainly make it very difficult for residents to get around?
Thank you for your question. I think the team from TfL spoke to the Transport Committee yesterday and this was an issue raised. Before yesterday, I was reassured that their plans around maintenance weren't going to cause any problems around the big football game or the royal wedding. I'm happy to go away and look again today at the points you're making, just to reassure myself. But if it is the case that maintenance work would cause any problems for travel, that they can be moved. Let me go away and look at that, 'cause sometimes these are programmed in advance, but you're right, it doesn't make sense ever for there to be maintenance works taking place in advance of big events. We have in the past moved them, but let me go and check that if that's okay, and I'll come back to you today, tomorrow, to let you know what I'm
Okay,
told.
just on that, Mr Mayor, one of the lines will affect Wembley, and when TfL mentioned their modelling, they referred to the marriage of Prince Charles and Camilla, and I think you'll agree this is a much bigger event than Charles and Camilla, and also the FA Cup at the same time. So,
Sure. I mean,
appreciate
as far
your
as
thoughts on that.
I'm not an expert on royal weddings, but as far as Wembley's concerned, the TfL have lots of expertise around big events at Wembley. It's not simply cup finals. NFL, there are other finals and semi-finals taking place at Wembley, and they're very good at organising transport to make sure it fits around that. But the additional challenge, as you mentioned, is the royal wedding. So can I go away and come back to you during the course of the day just to reassure myself and then reassure you, and I'll copy in assembly members as well.
Very kind. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to formal questions to the Mayor as set out on the priority order paper. The first question relates to serious and violent crime and is in the name of Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. This violent crime in London and across our country is simply unacceptable. It cannot be tolerated. Keeping Londoners safe remains my top priority. I'm doing everything in my power to end this violent scourge. I continue to press the Met to keep doing all they can to keep on top of this problem in London. This is a national problem. I'm very clear about wanting to work closely with the government to deliver all possible solutions for this challenge. We must put aside the differences we have and come together to take on the scourge of knife crime that is ruining lives nationwide. However, the police service in London, like the rest of the country, is overstretched and under-resourced. Violent crime has been rising across the country since 2014. The government is failing in its basic duty to keep London safe by imposing cuts of £1 billion on the Met Police. The Home Office's own evidence shows you cannot keep cutting without consequences. That's why I'm investing an extra £110 million in the Met to keep police numbers as high as possible. This investment includes an additional £15 million a year to proactively target knife and violent crime. This is funding the Met's new Violent Crime Task Force, with investment focused on increased enforcement, improved technology and equipment. There is more police presence on the streets as the Met continue to step up their patrols as part of their tireless work in keeping Londoners safe. Police officers have worked overtime, council leave and rest days to ensure that extra officers can be on duty. On behalf of all Londoners, I want to thank them for their commitment. But the police cannot tackle this alone. We need a relentless focus on preventing violent crime from happening in the first place and tackling the causes of crime. To support this, our knife crime strategy is backed up with significant funding to help the Met and preventative services address this issue. We announced £7 million last year to projects to help and tackle youth violence. To support our schools, communities and young people further, I've also set up a new £45 million Young Londoners Fund to help tackle the causes of violent crime and support young people to turn away from criminality. I recently announced the 43 grassroots community-led anti-knife crime projects across the capital who will benefit from a £1.4 million investment. Together with the police, ministers, MPs, assembly members, councillors, community groups, victims, their families and Londoners, I'll continue to work tirelessly to tackle violent crime. However, while we're doing everything we can from City Hall to tackle this, it also requires national solutions and leadership from government. As the Chair said, last month I brought together London's political leaders, the Home Secretary and ministers here at City Hall. I hope that the new Home Secretary, like his predecessor, agrees to my call to put aside party politics and work together on solutions to the problems. I am confident he will. On the 26th of April, a meeting of the Serious Violence Task Force convened by the previous Home Secretary in the House of Commons was a positive start. We needed a more concerted cross-government action on this issue. That's why it's more important than ever that we work together to make sure every Londoner, regardless of age or background, feels safe in our great city.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that very full and comprehensive answer, which unfortunately has not left me with much time in terms of asking supplementaries. But can I also take this opportunity to wish you all the best for Ramadan Mubarak, and greetings. Just two things very quickly. You talked about the new Home Secretary and that you have confidence in his ability to address the issue of the cuts to London's police force. You clearly worked with him. But can I just stress the gravity of the situation? Last night, D. Collins, Chief Constable of West Yorkshire Police, was on television on Panorama, and this is what she has to say, quotes, "We are seeing increasing amounts of risk to public safety because there's just simply less and less officers and staff. We are doing our best. We could do better, but if there are any further austerity measures, I fear it can only get worse." So having worked with the Home Secretary and having said what you just said, that you are confident that he will come to grips with this issue, do you think that he will, however, given the internal forces that work within the Home Office, be able to fully grasp the situation and fund London's Met properly and fairly?
I think that we're seeing...
Confidence is one thing, of course, but it's action that we're actually interested in.
I think we're seeing across the country a rise in serious violent crime, actually in a whole range of crimes. The rise in London is not as steep as it is around England and Wales. Around the country, 20,000 police officers, fewer now than in 2010. The Home Office's own research said there is a link between cutting police resources and an increase in serious violent crime. Unfortunately, the politicians don't agree with the research from their experts. I'm hoping a fresh pair of eyes will look at the issue and understand the importance of the Home Secretary lobbying for more resources from the Treasury, because unfortunately we've seen a cut in police numbers, but also a cut in preventative services as well.
So clearly the campaign for funding for London's Met, proper funding continues. But very quickly, Mr. Mayor, this is a complex problem which clearly requires robust enforcement action, certainly short-term, alongside long-term prevention. So your knife strategy in June, it will be 1 year on since we launched it. Is there anything more that you think can be done? What do you make of his success in terms of action on the streets, and particularly with regard to social media and youth education? I'll just say this very quickly, bearing in mind that I've run out of the time that is allocated to me. But someone who's just been elected as councillor in the London Borough of Newham, Delphine Tuhura, her son was the subject of a shooting in December. I spoke to her last night in preparation for today's meeting, and she stressed to me the importance to get the message to you about education, and particularly getting the message across to young people about the effect of carrying knives and using guns.
I mean, I'll answer it quickly because of time pressures, but can I just say that the strategy is a combination of prevention, diversion and enforcement. What is a new phenomenon is social media. So when we were growing up, if I had a beef with you, I'd say it to you face to face. It was very difficult for me to tell you I was angry with you or to provoke you from the other side of the borough or the other side of London. Social media is a game changer for criminality, as well as the benefits it brings as well. And that's why it's really important that police and politicians work closely with the social media companies so they take action speedily, because you're right, social media is being used by some people to lead to a proliferation of violent activity, including the rise in serious violent crime to do with knives and guns. But I'm happy to work with the councillor and the authorities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Assembly Member Boff.
At your violent crime summit on the 10th of April, the Commissioner, your Deputy Mayor for Policing and the Home Secretary of the time all expressed the view that much of the surge in violence that we have witnessed on London's streets was linked to the demands of the illegal drugs market. Would you agree with that view?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the experts I've spoken to, and the other thing just worth saying, Senator Boff, is at the separate meeting organised by the Home Secretary at the time, there's been two. Both those meetings also, they mentioned drugs being a big factor in relation to the increase in violent crime, with an international dimension as well.
Thank you for that. David Lammy MP has stated that most of these killings are being fuelled by a huge spike in the movement of drugs, and that the police in our country has lost control of the drugs market. Is it not time to take control of the drugs market so it can be regulated? Isn't it time to legalise to save lives?
You raised this question as well at the summit, and the Home Secretary quite deftly sort of didn't answer the question. Look, there are different schools of thought in relation to this. I'm just not in favour of legalising drugs. I know the arguments that there are and the complexities in the issue. And I know that during the coalition government, the Liberal Democrats did some work around this area. I'm not persuaded, but if there is expert advice that you can point to for as the national politicians who will make the decision in Parliament, then of course there's something for them to look into. I'm not persuaded that legalising drugs will lead to the sort of uppy sunlands that some predict it will do.
Are you open, therefore, for me to, with expert evidence, come and present the case to you, for you to assess it? I mean, just for example, we know that cannabis is the most widely sold drug in London, but data released from the Home Office has shown that cannabis seizures have plummeted by 34% in the past 5 years, whilst Class A drugs have dropped by just 12%. All the while, this city sees more and more violent crime. The police have effectively handed the cannabis market over to criminal networks, which is fueling violent crime and exploiting young people. They are doing so as they know that no amount of resource committed to the police is sufficient to stop criminal gangs running this market. And why this is a London issue? London has the highest proportion of young people who have taken drugs. A 2018 NHS survey shows that 29% of 11 to 15-year-olds stated that they have taken drugs, which is 7% higher than the national average. If I can present some more evidence to you, I'd appreciate the opportunity. And I think many people who've experienced the drugs-based crime and the drugs-based poor health outcomes as a result of the illegal drugs market would appreciate that opportunity to present the case.
Chair, can I just say I'm very happy to meet with the Assembly member and the experts he wants to bring along to meet with me and the Deputy Mayor. Of course, I'm happy to meet with you, but can I be frank? I don't want to raise expectations. I've not been persuaded so far, but I'm happy to meet with you for you to present the evidence you're talking about. I think it's a bit more complex than your question suggests, but I'm happy to meet with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Shah.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, in my patch, I'll start with Harrow, which is considered to be one of the safest borough in London. On 6th of May, we had 2 youths, aged 13 and 15, shot at. In Brent, on 1st of May, on the border of Harrow, a man in his 30s was murdered in shooting near Queensberry Station. Community is shocked. They're looking for reassurance and action. Both the chair and you have mentioned the cross-party summit and informal police and crime committee meeting we had in April, which were positive, and as you put it quite rightly, we were able to park our differences and we had a constructive dialogue. There was consensus to what I would describe as multi-agency approach to drive down knife, gun crime, and serious and violent crime. Now, you have quite rightly gone through a lot of measures involving a number of agencies today, which we support, and we want them to be successful and effective. One thing I want to get your comments about is the area of how important it is to engage with communities, work with them. Well, one of the, I think as it was reported in Evening Standard last week, the top Met officer has stressed the need to help, to gain help from communities, to tackle the crime issue, and also important, as we heard in this chamber from various leaders when we gathered in April, importance of listening to the communities and gaining their confidence as well. Can you tell us how you would take that important agenda forward so that with everything we do, communities are on board, they're reassured, and that they have confidence on what the police is doing, what we are doing to drive down the crime?
Thank you for your question and the way what you said earlier on. So we talked about the summit held here with senior politicians and the police. What we've not talked about is there was another summit chaired by Matthew Ryder, the Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, with Sophie Linden and myself, where we brought together community groups into City Hall. And the level of interest was such we had to have overspill rooms in the committee rooms downstairs in addition to the living room. And those communities were from across London, all different ages, all different ethnicities, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, some bereaved families, some victims of crime, others with expertise. And what was interesting was the numbers of people who'd never been to City Hall before, or been invited by City Hall to meet with them. Additionally, we've gone out to communities. I've been to various meetings across London with Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden and Deputy Mayor Matthew Ryder to meet with the community, because you're right, without the community's input, we're not going to solve this. Let me give you some examples. We need big brothers, big sisters, mum, dad, uncles, aunties, saying to a young person who's thinking about leaving home with a knife, don't leave home with a knife. You're not going to be more safe, you'll be less safe. To the point where, to protect the young person, that person should be thinking about ringing the police, saying, you know what, my son, my younger brother's left the home with a knife. Because I love him, I'm telling you the police so you can take action to stop him harming others or himself being harmed. Secondly, it's not just so family members, but the community will provide the resilience young people need. I know Sean and I have talked about this in the past. There are the family. The phrase that I've used is the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. The community are the village, and they have a big role to play in relation to making sure young people are resilient, so they don't join criminal gangs, they don't think it's okay to carry a knife, it's not okay to carry a gun. But also, the route map to being successful is not get rich quick by being involved in criminality, but working hard at school, getting an apprenticeship, doing the right thing. So, look, I can't amplify more your really important question about the role of the community, and we're doing various things. One thing I should just add, by the way, which is linked to the community, is we'll shortly be having a meeting with chief executives, council leaders and council leads as well, to make sure we get them, because the councillors often know their communities best out of everyone.
Chair, that's very welcome, and thank you for that. I will talk to Matthew and Deputy Mayor for Policing. I think it would be useful to see if we can actually have almost like borough-wide engagement. Yes, it's great to talk to local authorities and chief exec, etc., but talking with communities, how we can engage with them locally in their patches, I think very critical. Thank you.
Assembly Member Sahota.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Hi. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for the leadership you've shown in tackling the problem of knife crime in London and seeking to address the issue head on. As the Mayor, you've spoken about taking a public health approach to tackling knife crime. Please, could you explain to me what you exactly mean by this and what challenges you foresee in implementing such an approach in London?
Okay. Well, for those that aren't experts, and I know you know about this, but one of the things that we saw in the Scottish experience was how they took a public health approach towards dealing with knife crime. It was a long-term initiative. It took more than 10 years to get to the bottom of it. But they treated serious violent crime as a virus. And they tried to deal with the root causes of the virus. But also they realised that just like in a virus, you can have contagion. If you allow one violent act not to be tackled, it can lead to a domino effect, more violent acts. So the idea about treating it as a public health is you tackle all those things. Preventing young people joining criminal gangs, preventing young people carrying knives, taking action with the drugs that's been referred to previously, diversionary tactics, prevention tactics, using mental health practitioners. It's a holistic approach. The Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor have been to Scotland. I've met with the Scottish experts in London, and I think there's no alternative. Just having an enforcement role won't by itself work, as Unmesh Desai talked about. We need a prevention, diversion as well. And that's what the public health approach is about, and it's referred to in the knife crime strategy published last year as well.
Yes, well, I think, thank you for explaining the approach. But tell us how you intend to take this forward in London. I mean, what are the next steps for us in London to take this public health approach to because as you say, this is multidisciplinary and it needs investment, it needs someone to drive it. So what do you think, How will you take this forward?
So one of the things the things that the previous Home Secretary deserves credit for is I think she accepted this is a national problem that needs national solutions, and she also convened the first of there'll be monthly meetings around the serious violent task force. The reason why it's important is around the table should be the key players: Education Minister, Minister from other departments. My criticism, and I've said this to her, and I've made this point to the new Home Secretary, is what's missing there is somebody from health. I think there should be somebody from health there for the reasons that I've mentioned, and there should be somebody from justice there as well, and CPS. And so having the right people around the table is really important, civic society as well, because they can just agree things and action them rather than working in silos. And my frustration has been is how governments work in silos. I know this as being a former minister, and we need to just get rid of the silos and work together. So, for example, when it comes to excluding a child, you do realise when you're excluding a child that if that person ends up in a pupil referral unit, it's more likely rather than less that at some stage they'll get involved in criminality. That can't be right. And so we need education input, pupil referral input, Ofsted input, curriculum in schools input as well. That's education. Mental health has got a big role to play in relation to the help young people aren't getting because of cuts in CAMS and all sorts of other issues. We need to make sure in relation to youth workers in A&Es, the work that we've funded through Red Thread and St Giles Trust is been amplified. That teachable moment is really important as well. Really important, of course, to make sure young people aren't enticed into criminal gangs in the first place. So the approach we want to see holistically is getting all the key players working together. You know the concerns around yachts and the YJB as well. You know, if you can stop a young person committing their first crime by the time they're 18, it's mission accomplished. There are very few people who commit their first crime once they're adults. And so it's investing in young people, keeping them active. And that's one of the reasons why we've invested record sums in the new Young Londoners Fund.
This task force, that's a national task force, isn't it, that you're referring to? But will there be a task force for London particularly? And so, are you putting in resources into yourself?
I'm not sure if the Home Secretary calls it a task force, but it's a national, group, if you like, that meets regularly and includes MPs like David Lammy and Ian Duncan-Smith as well, who are there as well. As far as London's are concerned, one of the things that we're keen to do is to make sure, Navin referred to communities, one of the things we need to do is make sure that each borough's knife crime plan is focused towards that particular borough. You'll be aware that unfortunately there are a number of boroughs where there is much more serious violent crime than other boroughs. The press have talked about a northeast corridor in London, and we are bringing together those people. There is currently a London Crime Prevention Board that meets regularly, which is the key people around the table. We've now actually for the first time asked a clinician to come from the health sector. That was missing. And so we are doing it across London as well, and it's really important that it filters down to the communities. There's no point politicians and people in positions of power and influence talking about it. It's got to be bottom up as well. That's one of the reasons why the work Matthew and Sophie did with the communities meeting, one of many pieces of work taking place, is so important.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Devonish.
You'll remember at the Violent Crime Summit it was held in Purda because of the elections. You'll agree, I hope, that there was really in-depth insight from people of all parties, borough leaders, MPs and Assembly members on the day. Are you going to publish a note of what was said to make sure we don't miss any of that good learning and deep experience, please?
Yeah, we are. Can I just also say this? This does not mean to be patronising. I was incredibly impressed by the Police and Crime Committee meeting as well, that happened that week as well. These are serious discussions. All the knockabout stuff was left at the door, and it left me with a sense of optimism. And so we are intending to do a note of the outcomes. Just so you're aware, I have written to the council leaders who came to thank them for coming, and all the MPs and stakeholders and stuff, and said that this work's got to carry on. And so far, it's been quite encouraging. So we will get the note circulated as soon as we can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Assembly Member Bailey and relates to victims of crime.
It is important we engage with victims of crime, that they are supported and we learn from their experiences. I've met many victims of knife and gun crime and bereaved families over the last 2 years, nearly always without any media or publicity. I just don't think it's appropriate. It's worth discussing what happens when a homicide occurs, though, Chair. The police assign a family liaison officer to work with the family. One of the things the family liaison officer will say to the family in appropriate cases is that I, as Mayor, am keen to meet with them. I often write a letter of condolence and an offer is made to meet with the family, or we can try and provide practical help. I try to help even with those things outside of the Mayor's powers or control, because often we can open doors the family just can't. These families are going through many different things. Grief, sometimes they've got to identify the body, a post-mortem arranging families to come from overseas, retrieving possessions and dealing with and planning a funeral for the child, helping with police appeals and so forth. So sometimes when we reach out to victims' families in the aftermath of an incident, their grief is still too raw and they aren't ready or don't want to meet. At other times, they've asked that a meeting be kept private, and of course we respect that. As well as meeting with the families of young people killed by knife and gun crime, it has been my sad duty as Mayor to speak to many victims of crime and other tragedies and their families. Following the terror attacks at Westminster Bridge, London Bridge and Finsbury Park, I met with some of those caught up in the tragedy as well as some of the families of those affected. And I've met many of those affected by the Grenfell tragedy last year. It could well be that crime has been committed here as well. The police are still investigating. I also met with many survivors and bereaved family members of the Croydon tram crash. I've also sadly been to many funerals and memorial services. Deputy Mayor Matthew Ryder also meets with victims and their families to offer his support and hear directly from those affected. And Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime Sophie Linden regularly meets and works with victims and groups representing them as well. When we consulted on the police and crime plan, the knife crime strategy and violence against women and girls strategy, we met with unprecedented numbers of individual victims and victims' organisations. I'll continue to meet victims and their families as I think it's important to not only give support in the immediate aftermath, but to learn from their experiences as we develop policies and deliver services and programmes. My commitment to understanding and improving the experience of victims led me to appoint London's first ever Independent Victims Commissioner, Claire Waxman. Claire Waxman hosted London's inaugural Victims Summit last year, which I attended, and where I met a number of individual victims too. Claire's convened a victims reference group, providing a forum for victims and the victim services providers that help people in the aftermath. I'm determined to improve the services available to victims through our Victims Services Commissioning. That's why I've committed £47 million of mayoral funds over the next 3 years on direct services to support victims of crime. This is an increase of more than 15% than was previously provided.
Morning, Mayor.
Hi.
Thank you for your answer, and that you've now met with some of the victims of our particularly recent spike in knife crime. What I really want to ask you about firstly is, in March, the Victim Commissioner launched an inquiry into victim support in London, how they're being supported. Do you know when we'll get those results back?
So the reports of the work that Claire's doing will be back soon, but as far as the victim support for young people that we're talking about, that will start next year. Is that what you meant?
Oh, she also to look at when victims are affected by a crime in London, particularly with violent crime this morning. She launched an inquiry to look at that, to look at they get the right support when they need the support. It's my understanding that that piece of work hasn't finished. Do you know when it will be finished?
That will finish this summer.
Okay.
It's just worth reminding colleagues that we've also negotiated with the MOJ some more devolution of court-based services, because the ambition is from the start of somebody being the victim of crime up until the end of the criminal case, they receive a joined-up service. Unfortunately, what happens now is up until it reaches court, it's commissioned by London, but from court onwards, it's commissioned by the MOJ. The devolution deal agreed with the Justice Secretary, David Gork, means from 2019, all of it will be commissioned in London, and the separate issue is homicide. Homicide is commissioned from MOJ, so victim support for homicide victims, unfortunately, is not London, but obviously you'll appreciate that some of the cases recently have been homicide cases. But that doesn't matter, I still meet with them, yeah.
I'm glad you've moved on to that, because I'd like some clarification around the thinking you're doing, if and when you get these powers, around what will change for victim support in London, because one of the key things in combating knife crime is community relations, and many of the victims I spoke to, A, don't feel like the police can protect them, and B, don't feel like they have the correct relationship to give information to preempt crime. The Metropolitan Police's reputation around homicide support is actually quite good, but around community support, and that's the terror that knife crime causes, again, it leads to why a large number of our young people arm themselves because of the perceived terror. What will you be changing with these new powers to support those particular victims and their wider community?
Well, there's 2 points you refer to, which we need to just distinguish the 2 points. One is there are victims of crime who are carrying knives and weaponry because they're worried about being victims again. And that's just a fact. You and I have spoken to many young people where that's happening. the police have a responsibility to keep them safe, but to make them realise that actually carrying the knife isn't the best way to keep them safe, and there's a role there for the police to play, but also encouraging those young people to use victim support services. They're not using them now because often they're not reporting the crime. The numbers of times where, even on the most serious criminality, the victims haven't cooperated with the police beggars belief. There's a number of reasons why victims aren't cooperating, by the way. One is they're worried about their own safety. If they report to the police, will the police be able to keep them safe? Secondly, because they themselves think they can get justice, inverted commas, and the police can't get them justice. And so it's not simply an issue of victim support. It's trying to educate the public and inform these groups and reassure them that actually the role of justice is for the police to do, not them, and that, you're right, is about confidence building. The victim support work is, if you like, linked to the work of the police. It's, if you like, incidental to the work police do, because often if you're not reporting a crime, even though you're a victim, there's no chance of you getting victim support.
I understand that, but I want to make the point that our conversation this morning has been very non-partisan, and that's correct. But in this particular place, you, as the Mayor of London, can make a big difference here. So I'm seeking clarity, and I'm prepared for you to write to me about what we will change when we get these powers to support communities. Because, of course, recovering from an incident like this is very hard for a family. For the wider community, it's generating more knife crime, and it's building a barrier between the police, and we need something to change there as well. We'll never get on top of this problem. And so, I just want to go on to give you something else to really get on, because this is something I want to lay at your door. And you and I try not to play too much party politics with you, but we've had a 44% increase in knife crime. And I hear you that it's a countrywide problem, that there's been a rise in violent crime across country. But we've had a 10% fall in London of people who have been proceeded against by the police. And again, this is something that you can make a real difference with. It's what are you as the Mayor of London going to do about changing around the fact that the police are proceeding against less people when we have such a huge increase in knife crime?
Well, I'm sure you saw the same programme that the Assembly members here saw last night in relation to the police explaining the reasons why across the country they're not proceeding with many offences, even though offences are going up, and that's a lack of resources. And that's the explanation given by police officers on a programme last night on TV. Not me, not Labour Assembly members, but by police officers outside London. And by the way, the increase in homicides that are drug-related nationally is 50 to 55%. And so that's the context of the increase in crime in London. Of course, I accept responsibility as the Police Crime Commissioner for London. But you can't escape the fact that across the country, England and Wales, 39 of the 43 police forces have seen an increase in knife crime, and I accept we've got to do much better.
I accept that, Mayor. We'd all like to have our particularly our London police, because that's our focus here, to have more police. But all of your press releases talk about the extra £110 million that the government has given you access to, which is a great thing. We'd like more. So could we have some detail about what you're going to do about that? Because you and I both know that getting on top of victim support would make a significant difference to the amount of knife crime we have in London, in our town here in London. So what can you do to have the police do more with the new money you're providing, the government's provided, particularly around proceedings? Because you just used the words justice, and you know that a lot of young people, if they don't perceive that there is some justice, they will take the law into their own hands. And again, you are in a prime position to do something about this. So could I please ask you for some detail, and I accept you may have to write to me on some of this, about what you will do with our local police, the Metropolitan Police, about more proceedings happening in London against people who commit knife crimes.
Okay, well, let me just clarify the errors in the question from the Assembly member. Number one, the increase in funding the police are getting this year is because the government has allowed us to raise council tax in London to £12 a person, roughly speaking 5.1%. The government hasn't been generous to us. They've said you can raise a tax that's the most regressive tax there is in London.
But that's why I use the word
let me
access,
answer, Chair.
Mr. Mayor.
I mean, look, So what I've done is raise the council tax to the maximum allowed. That's raised, roughly speaking, £50 million. Separately, I've diverted business rates to this area. So in total, there's £110 million being spent this year on policing. £15 million of that is being ring-fenced for the violent crime
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I don't mean to be rude, but that isn't the question I asked you. And I did use the word access. I didn't act like someone had sent you a cheque. I did use the word access. This isn't about you and the government, a relationship we have with funding. It's about what we will do with the money we already have. You have this money. I'm just asking you, what are you going to do differently to improve the situation with the money you have here in London? That's all I'm asking you.
Okay, so we've set up a violent crime task force, and £50 million is ring-fenced for that work annually. It's really, really important. Separately, there's money we've invested with young people, which has been done differently. So £7 million last year for anti-knife crime projects, and an additional £45 million over the next 3 years on the Young Londoners Fund. Record amount of sums invested in young people, differently to what was done previously. That £45 million, by the way, is also money diverted away from business rates to use in young people. The applications have opened, and they opened this week, and we're encouraging groups across London to bid for the £45 million worth of money. That's a key part of the prevention and diversionary part of dealing with knife crime.
Mr. Mayor, can I just stop you? Because you all know we have time constraint.
Chair, I'm really sorry, Chair. I'm asked a question, which is to give details of the differences. I'm giving the answer, and I'm interrupted for a second time.
Yeah, and that's only because, Mayor, I'm just going to ask you to focus particularly. I accept your answer, and I welcome it. I just want you to focus particularly.
Finished it, but...
And that's fine, because you'll give me details that I don't need, that you've already spoken about, I can get elsewhere. I just want to focus on victim support. That's all I'm asking, just about victim support, because you have time constraints in the chamber.
Okay, on victim support, Chair, what I'm doing differently, which I thought the question was, is I'm doing differently in committing £47 million of funds to direct services to support victims of crime over the next 3 years. And what I'm doing differently is increasing the amount victims get by more than 15% from the previous mayor. I hope that answers the question in a succinct manner.
Yes, it does, man. It would be. I thank you for the answer, but you cannot complain that I want you to give specifically around victims, because this is something in London that people really feel has not been heard. You've done a lot of community meetings. I'm sure you will have learnt from those communities that they feel they're not being supported. That's enough from me, Chair.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Assembly Member Russell and relates to the financial health of young Londoners.
Thank you, Chair. Can I begin by thanking you, Caroline, for your work over the last year to chair the Assembly's Economic Committee, and I wish Susan all the best of luck over the next year chairing that important committee. It's vital that Londoners are equipped with the tools they need to manage their money effectively, and the recent London Assembly Economic Committee report, Shortchanged, was right to highlight the need to improve the financial health and education of young Londoners. City Hall recently conducted a representative survey of young people in London that showed less than half could identify having learned anything at school about how to manage money. This is despite financial education being added to the secondary school's national curriculum in 2014 as part of citizenship education. These results reflect similar national surveys conducted by the Money Advice Service, and as more and more young people are borrowing to cover basic living costs, the need to properly prepare them to manage their finances has never been greater. I'm currently finalising plans for a summit at City Hall that would bring together local authorities, education providers, banks, charities and technology companies to identify how City Hall can best support partners in addressing these challenges. This summit will look to address a number of the recommendations covered in the Shortchanged report, and I'll happily extend an invitation for representatives of the Economic Committee to attend. Improving the pay and quality of employment in London is also important for improving the financial health of Londoners. This year I'll be launching my Good Work Standard that will promote further the London living wage and encourage more employers to pay their staff fairly. It will also look to promote the uptake of payroll-deducted loans for employees, as well as membership of credit unions, which are an important and vital alternative for people who are excluded from mainstream finance.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for your very positive response to the Economy Committee report on the financial health of Londoners. I'm really glad to hear you not only promising to host a summit, but talking now about getting that organised. I think, bringing together technology innovators, fintech providers, voluntary and community sector organisations and education providers is really important if we're going to improve the financial health of Londoners. Now, there's going to be a lot of organisations who are keen to attend the summit, and from people working with some of the most marginalised groups in London, and also, you know, some of the big banks with their sort of corporate social responsibility functions. Which team within the GLA is going to be organising your summit, and which deputy mayor will this sit with?
Well, why don't I work with the new chair and you to make sure we get the right people there? I'm happy to do that. It's not. I mean, it's not. This is about making sure we get the right people there, because we'd kick ourselves if they weren't there. So why don't I, after the chair, arrange for my team to meet with the new chair and Caroline to make sure it's a success?
That would be fantastic. Thank you. And you also, do you know when you're hoping to get this summit to happen?
I've not got the date, but it's not far away.
Okay.
Summer, I think, is the
summer.
phrase the officials like me to use. They prefer seasons rather than dates. But,
okay, summer. I'll chase you in September if it hasn't happened.
But no, but the team will meet before then to make sure the right people are there.
Okay, fantastic. Now, our report revealed that just over a quarter, that's 27% of 18 to 30-year-olds in London, say that they are in debt all the time. Now, I recently met with my bank and the JP Morgan Foundation, and they told me about a project they've been doing in Greenwich and also in Newham called the Money House Project. They work with young care leavers, preparing them for life as adults, managing their own finances. It's been a real success, and they are wanting to help to build relationships with more local authorities to help them scale up their project across London. Now, one practical thing you might be able to do, Mr. Mayor, is to use your channels of communication to share this good practice and help my bank to engage with local authorities so that they can extend this project working on the financial health of particularly some of the most marginalised young people, the care leavers. So is that something you would look at?
So two things. Firstly, it says autumn, not summer, so apologies for that. But we'll get you the date for the summit. But one of the reasons why we want to have the summit is to get best practice, then to roll it out. And so I think it'd be a mistake to start scaling up things before the summit, because the idea, as I understand from your report, the idea for the summit was to get everyone together and then get all the ideas and best practice and then roll them out. But that's the sort of thing, when there is a summit, it'd be a good presentation to have, and so we can see whether others are doing that and whether we can scale it up.
Great, thank you. And then finally, in your response to the report, you say that you're planning to conduct another survey with young people in London. Can I ask, do you know when that survey is likely to go live, and also how you're going to make sure that you get a really good range of young people from very diverse communities and different socio-economic backgrounds to complete it?
So the survey was done in February and March. It will be published, as is normal with the timetable for surveys, on the 6th of June. And so you'll see, and I've got, and so it was quite representative, 16 to 24-year-olds, and you'll see the results when they're published in June, but imminent.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm coming to the end of my time, so thank you for your offer to work closely with me and Assembly Member Hall on taking this work forward. Yep. Thank you.
Question from Assembly Member Whittle relating to a statement by Sir Craig Mackey.
First, I want to say that my thoughts are still with Mr. Osborne Brooks and his wife. For anyone having their home broken into, this is a traumatic experience, but the circumstances involved in this case are very distressing. Immediately following the incident, the homeowner, Mr. Osborne Brooks, was arrested pending further investigation. This is understandable, bearing in mind someone had lost their life, but I'm pleased that the Met worked quickly with the Crown Prosecution Service to get a decision over Mr. Osborne Brooks, and that he was released very quickly without charge. The steps taken by the Met, as outlined by Sir Craig Mackey, make clear that the police will conduct a thorough but swift investigation of any incident where someone has lost their life. The law of self-defence is also clear. Homeowners can use reasonable force to protect themselves or others, to carry out an arrest, or to prevent crime. Incidents such as these are dealt with on a case-by-case basis by the police and the CPS, taking into account the circumstances. I think, as we've seen in this case, the law in dealing with this case was done in a sensitive way and a balanced way.
Thank you very much for your answer, Mr. Mayor. I think it's interesting. I asked this question actually in the context of what we've been talking about this morning, particularly about the need for victim support. Do you think, and I accept everything that you say there, but do you think, therefore, that the particular wording and statement and the way that the Deputy Commissioner Mackey actually put his priorities in that statement was at the very, very least, shall we say, insensitive, because that was the reaction instinctively on seeing it or hearing it.
I mean, the way the police dealt with the case in relation to the homeowner, I think, swiftly, very good. I think the fact we've got to accept is that when we think about the person who lost his life, those that were his family have lost somebody they love. And that's the point I think the Deputy Commissioner was trying to get across. Not condoning, of course, that sort of appalling criminal behaviour, but recognising that for that family, they've lost somebody they love.
I think that we would have come to some sort of stage if he was condoning that behaviour, of course not. But I think that it just shows something about maybe a lack of leadership or whatever when it comes to violent crime, because as you point out, there were various events after this. There was the situation with these floral tributes, which somehow or other the police didn't do anything about. It kind of went on. There was a feeling that somehow or other victim, if you like, and perpetrator were in some ways, the waters were being muddied. And this particular statement, where in fact the tragedy of the supposed tragedy of the death of Henry Vincent was actually mentioned first before the homeowner. And I think it was somehow emblematic of the way, maybe, do you not think, of the way that the police maybe operate in many situations now?
Well, that's not the experience in this particular case. In this particular case, I mean, I remember in previous cases, in previous years, where homeowners have faced prosecution for using reasonable force to defend their family and their home. And to give the police credit, and I think we should once in a while, they acted pretty swiftly with the CPS. And very swiftly, look, somebody lost their life. The police have got to investigate that. I mean, otherwise we criticise the police for not investigating that. And so they investigated, liaised with the CPS, and swiftly released without charge, which I think is progress.
Nobody's doubting that for a moment. In a way, the fact that the particular guy in question, the burglar, was a career criminal and all the rest of it, that in a way is sort of irrelevant to the actual principle here. The fact is that although I agree with what you say, and no one's doubting that, and the right of the homeowner to protect themselves, at the same time, what the police say, particularly in times like this with violent crime, is terribly important symbolically. And do you therefore not have any problem with his statement on LBC?
Well, I listened to the LBC. I've read a transcript, and as someone who's done LBC on a regular basis, often you're speaking very quickly, and it's very, very fast and stuff. And I think it's different to a statement being prepared in advance and all the rest of it and stuff. What I would say is this: it is really important that we have a criminal justice service that supports victims. That's one of the reasons why I've appointed the first ever Victims Commissioner, why we're investing in record sums in victims. But you're right, if inadvertently, and it must have been inadvertently, I know it is, an impression is given that the victims are an afterthought, that's wrong. That sends the wrong message, and we've got to make sure there is no confusion about victims taking priority.
Okay, I accept all that too. But the fact remains that, the Deputy Commissioner is a public figure, like you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, he must know what it's like to do interviews and all the rest of it. You have to, all your words are weighed. You must know that better than most people. So therefore, I just would say again that this particular statement was so unhelpful and unhelpful to the residents around there, because I went down there myself. I would be grateful if you could at least say that this was perhaps wrongly put.
I'm not going to say they're wrongly put. What I'm going to say is that the police's behaviour in relation to the quick release, the quick work with the CPS is one that should be commended, but also gives me a chance to say again that homeowners must be allowed to use reasonable force to defend them and their families and their property. I'm pleased a few years ago the CPS clarified that with the guidance they gave in this particular case. I'm really pleased that Mr. Osborne Brooks was released without charge quickly. He's still distressed, by the way. That family is still traumatised. If you meet or you yourself have suffered a burglary, you'll know how traumatic it is, particularly an aggravated burglary. And our thoughts should be with him, which is how I began my answer.
They certainly should. In fact, not just traumatised, he probably will never go back to the house, actually. He's in a safe house. And the actual families you probably know of the particular burglar actually decided to have the funeral going past the house. I mean, utter provocation. utter provocation. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you.
Next question is from Assemblymember Copley, and it relates to cladding concerns post-Grenfell.
Thank you. The fire at Grenfell Tower last summer devastated the North Kensington community. As Mayor, I'll do everything within my power to ensure that justice is achieved for the bereaved, survivors and those who've lost their lives. The fire also raised urgent questions about the safety of other blocks that may have similar cladding. I do not have formal powers to intervene where there are building safety issues, and I do not have any role in the system of building control. However, I am determined to do everything I can to make sure residents living in affected buildings are safe. The fact that dangerous cladding has now been found on 158 social blocks across the country and on an increasing number of private blocks highlights just how broken the building safety system is. For that reason, I endorse James Judith's interim findings as an important step forward when they were published in December, and hope the final review released today will deliver the fundamental reform that is needed. I'll be reading the report in detail later today and will respond in due course. Our top priority must be to make sure that Londoners living in affected blocks are not in danger. The London Fire Brigade has carried out more than 700 inspections of high-rise blocks since June, designed to support building owners to put in place appropriate interim fire safety measures while we await the removal and replacement of unsafe cladding. These interim measures may include the installation of a common alarm system or a 24-hour waking watch and a change to the evacuation procedure. My team has also been working with London boroughs and housing associations to understand the scale of safety issues in buildings they own. I welcome the announcement finally from the government yesterday that they'll fund the remedial works on tower blocks owned by councils and housing associations. I remain, however, very concerned about the situation with privately owned blocks. It has taken government almost a year to intervene in the social sector. I dread to think how long it will take for them to get a grip on the issues of affected buildings in the private sector. First, the total number of private buildings with dangerous cladding is still not confirmed. Government strategy appears to rely on the owners of buildings with unsafe cladding to come forward voluntarily. This is not happening comprehensively, and London boroughs require much greater support to take necessary enforcement action to get a grip on this issue. The £1 million committed by government to date is utterly inadequate given the potential scale of the issue. And second, it's unacceptable that works are being delayed because of legal disputes over who's responsible for the costs in private sector blocks.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I want to turn to the Hackett report first, because I was extremely concerned that the final report, as was trailed, I think, a week ago, will not be recommending a ban on combustible cladding being attached to buildings. And I wondered what your position was on that. And are you concerned that on Radio 4 this morning, Dame Judith Hackett incorrectly claimed that no cladding systems using combustible materials had passed large-scale tests?
Well, I've not read the report, so all I've got to go on is the summary that's been in the media, so my answers are with that caveat. I'm surprised. I'm really surprised. There's also a different issue about desktop safety measures and in real fire situations. All I can say is I'll read the report today and then speak to the experts, the London Fire Brigade and others who are sort of experts on this, but I'm surprised by what I've heard this morning.
Okay, thank you for that answer on that. I want to turn now to the announcement from the government yesterday, finally, as you say, to compensate councils and housing associations. With the London Borough of Camden already reporting having spent £50 million on recladding 5 tower blocks, do you think £400 million from the government will be enough to fully fund this recladding?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think we have to recognise is over the last year, the anxiety caused not just to councils and housing associations, but to those tenants has been phenomenal. So I don't understand why it's taken a year to do this. We should welcome the fact that the government's done a U-turn.
Absolutely.
What I hope is the £400 million isn't a ceiling. I'm hoping they'll realise that actually if the principle is accepted, they'll support councils and housing associations, then there must be no upper limit. And councils like Camden and many others are taking action and they should be assisted. They can't afford, frankly speaking, to do it themselves.
And have you mentioned 158 social blocks across the country having this sort of cladding. Have you made any assessment, or do you know of any assessment of the number of those that are actually in London itself, or is there just a figure for the whole country at the moment?
So for the social blocks, housing association and councils, there is a figure for London, and the council have been working very closely, all councils of all parties across London, with the London Fire Brigade to make sure inspections take place. London Fire Brigade have been working round the clock for these inspections to take place. We've got a figure which I can give to you. I haven't got a figure for the private blocks for obvious
Yes.
reasons, and that's one of the big concerns people have.
Okay, well, if we could let us know the figure afterwards, that would be very helpful. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly member for Pigeon to ask about bus services in London.
Thank you, Chair. London has one of the best bus services in the world. The way people use bus services, though, is constantly changing. TfL will always need to review the network to make sure buses are efficient, safe and reliable, and they offer the best value for money. In central London, fewer people are travelling by bus, and instead people are walking, cycling and using our upgraded rail and tube network. At the same time, falling bus speeds caused by increasing congestion and roadworks have made customer journeys times excessively variable. That's why TfL is making changes so that the bus network will be simplified and used more efficiently. This will make best use of capacity and support our other priorities, such as reducing emissions and improving our streets for everyone to use. More buses will be deployed in areas that require additional capacity or where we've seen demand for an increase in bus capacity. When making these changes, I expect TfL to engage with customers and for the voice of the communities to be heard. TfL publicly consult on structural changes such as changes to bus routes, and last year it carried out public consultations on 91 routes. Additionally, TfL speaks to stakeholders and customers on other changes to the bus network, such as changes to service frequencies. But I understand that the subtleties of what is subject to consultation and what isn't can be and feel confusing to members of the public. TfL is working to get better at how it does this and have implemented changes over the last year to improve how it engages with communities. This includes creating the Local Communities and Partnerships team, which is dedicated to working with elected representatives and community and business groups at a local level. This sort of engagement is particularly important for people with accessibility requirements such as wheelchair users, visually impaired people and parents and carers with babies and children. The Local Communities and Partnership team will maintain discussions with local representatives to ensure they're kept involved. In response to concerns raised by Assemblymember Dismal and Assemblymember Copley, I've also asked that TfL ensure they brief the Assembly Transport Committee before major bus consultations are launched.
Thank you very much. Whilst I acknowledge that some routes have seen additional buses, the majority are seeing cuts to the frequency of buses. And take the RV1 that goes past City Hall. Do you accept that mistakes were made in cutting the bus route from 6 per hour to 3 per hour without any advance notice to passengers?
So I accept the consultation that should have taken place. The advance notice wasn't done. I don't accept that there aren't good reasons to reduce the service. I can go through the reasons if you like.
No, but you accept that it's not the right way to do it without any advance notice?
Yeah.
The cuts to the RV1 bus started on the 10th of February, and on the next day, thanks to an FOI, we now know that a senior TfL officer wrote to your office stating to avoid further situations like the RV1 bus changes. I've had a quick look on upcoming bus changes. He ends the email, I appreciate the upcoming election can change how we may need to act in the short to medium term, but any guidance appreciated given Val wasn't particularly happy with being surprised with the RV1 change. Do you think it's acceptable that not only were the public kept in the dark about cuts to the RV1 and other services, but so was your Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, that's why I said. That's why I made the point in answer to your previous question. The way it was handled wasn't good enough. And that's why they've got to do better.
But in your answer to my question, you've said that you're going to look at public consultation on sort of big changes to bus routes, but the timetabling, so the frequency, the new team are just going to engage with customers, have discussions with local representatives. Now, you have stated, quite rightly, you want to be the most transparent Mayor of London. So what I'd like is, will you agree to bring in genuine consultation on changes to bus routes, including the frequency, the timetable, rather than simply a notification?
I think it's not realistic to expect every time there's a change in frequency for there to be formal consultation, unless you reduce the quality of the consultation. So what's important is when there are changes, there's proper good quality consultation. What's important is that the new team we've set up works proactively with not just representatives, but community groups, particularly those who have issues with access and aren't on social media, aren't on digital. And it's important that elected representatives are informed in advance so they can then filter down and inform their constituents. It's really important. But to give you an idea of the scale, we have something like sort of 9,000 buses, 700 routes, 1,900 stops. And so I think the idea that the TfL would be expected to consult every time there's a change in frequency, it's just not realistic.
But if a route is being changed, okay, I accept that you may say that, a small change to a route, but if the frequency of a bus route is actually being halved from 6 an hour to 3 an hour, that is a significant change. Would you consider pushing TfL to consult on something on that scale, which really will change how people can use that bus route?
Well, that's one of the things that the new team that's been set up will be looking into, is how they can better keep people informed. Sometimes it's keeping them informed. So if you know in advance that a change is taking place, you can make alternative plans. So, for example, the bus route you mentioned, there are other buses. I think there are 3 routes, alternatives that people could use as well. The particular problem here is obviously the 2D street works and stuff, but giving people advance notice, giving them alternatives, I think it's really important.
But will you look to consult when a route is being halved in frequency? Will you look to consult passengers about that rather than just inform them?
It depends. I can't give an answer for every single route which may be changed in the future. I mean,
no, but
there are
halving
average...
the frequency is quite a lot. If you're going from 6 to 3 an hour, will you at least look at that? That is quite a high change. It's not just, an additional bus in or an additional bus out. Will you look to consult Londoners on significant changes like that?
I can't give an undertaking to consult when there is change on frequencies, no. What I can do is when there are structural changes, we will consult as we normally do. And because of the representations made by some members, Dismal and Copley, we'll make sure the Transport Committee is kept engaged. We're recruiting, we've got a new team now working on more consultation with Londoners, and it's really important that they do so.
It's very disappointing, Mr Mayor.
Assembly Member Dismal.
There has been a consultations on some of these, for example, on the complete cut of a route like the original Route 13, but the problem is the outcomes of the consultations are ignored anyway. But if there are frequency reductions, there's no consultation at all, and that can be compounded if there are several routes cut in this way at different times. For example, Golders Green to Finchley Road via Charles Hill has seen an 8% reduction overall. Finchley Road to Park Road via Swiss Cottage has had an 18% reduction. And following on the points that have been made, isn't it right that if there are these sort of salami slicing of routes, there should be some consultation at some stage to make sure that people's views are considered, but more importantly, that those views are actually listened to, rather than it being just an exercise?
Can I actually explain this? If there is a popular bus service and there is more demand for bus service, there'll be more buses being on that route. It's a basic supply and demand issue. If there are fewer passengers using a bus, I don't think it's unreasonable for there to be fewer buses on that route. So when you say consultation, the suggestion given by Senator Pigeon is that even though there are fewer people using the bus, even though there is need for fewer buses, we should continue to have more buses at a time when we've lost the operating grant, when our buses are subsidised £600 million a year from other public transport users. And I think that's not realistic. So I've got to be honest with Londoners in relation to, supply follows demand. If there are few people using those bus routes, it's not surprising if people decide to, if TfL decides to have fewer buses on the route. The key thing, though, is when there's a change in routes, for there to be proper consultation, but also when there is a change in frequency, for people to be informed of that so they can make alternative choices. And the real game changer for bus passenger users is going to be us improving the reliability of buses, really important in relation to one of the reasons why people give for not using buses anymore. The unlimited bus hopper, unlimited bus travel within an hour makes it possible for you to get off bus 1, get onto bus 2, get onto bus 3 within the course of the hour. A good example being around this area where there are buses doing similar routes which people can quite easily use as well. But the third point is to move buses to those parts of London where there is more demand for them. And so we will be reconfiguring our buses to move them from those areas where there is less demand for that bus to those areas where there is greater demand. I don't apologise for that.
Well, I mean, I don't want to push this because we've got little time, but if you look at Route 13, that was a disingenuous cut because the 82 bus was scrapped, but in fact, it was the 13 bus that was scrapped, and the 82 was renumbered 13. And there was a huge outcry, and there still is, because the service is so unreliable, and I get never-ending complaints about the change. Huge opposition to that particular change locally, all ignored. And the point about fewer passengers using fewer buses then results in a vicious circle, because reliability is not just about it turning up on time, it's also about frequency. And if we're serious about trying to get people out of cars and onto public transport, they've got to know that there's a public transport there for them to actually use.
But that's one of the reasons why we've made sure that buses are, particularly post Oxford Street being pedestrianised, fewer buses now going down Oxford Street than previously was the case. Those buses will move to outer London. And where the buses will go to is where there's demand for those buses. That could be because of more housing, could be because there are more jobs in the area, or there could be because there are not other forms of good alternative public transport. But bearing in mind, the business of TfL is to make sure we provide a public transport system, but to make sure that we follow demand, it would be perverse for TfL not to want to provide buses in those areas where there's demand for buses, and that's what they're going to carry on doing.
Okay. Assembly Member O'Connell.
Thank you very much. On the consultation point, I'm pleased over the years I've been here to see an improvement in the way TfL have worked with local communities, and I welcome the new partnership team. On a strategic point, I won't special plead on individual routes, but for some considerable time, we and I have been talking about the rebalancing of bus services from inner London to outer London, particularly zones 5 and 6, which many of us represent, where they are over-dependent on bus services because there are no alternatives. And I regret over a period of time we've not seen an improvement. We've seen strategies and words about it. But Mr Mayor, can I urge you to press a fast-forward button on what I call the rebalancing of bus services away from zones 1 and 2, where there are plenty of other alternatives, out to zones 5 and 6. Can I have your response to that, please?
So you're right. We need to show that we're doing that. And so later on this year, when the next plan from Transport is published, we'll give, I think Florence Shalomi also raised this issue last time, giving details of the movement so you can be reassured that we are seeing more bus kilometres in outer London than in inner London, as is the plan.
I look forward to that, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I welcome students from the Phoenix Academy White City who've just had a tutorial on supply and demand. Next question is from Assembly Member Bacon and relates to affordable housing.
Thank you. My targets for building new affordable homes are very challenging. Frankly, no mayor has achieved the level I'm aiming for, which is made even more challenging by me ditching the previous discredited definition of what an affordable home is. They all stretch the GLA, councils, housing associations and others as we set out to substantially boost the number of genuinely affordable homes we're building in London. Recently published statistics give me reason to be confident. Last year we started 12,526 genuinely affordable homes, including thousands of homes based on social rent levels. This was the highest number of affordable homes starts in any year since funding was devolved to City Hall. It included 2,826 homes based on social rent levels. This is more than the previous 4 years combined, and up from the pipeline I inherited, under which the number of homes for social rent supported by City Hall fell to 0. As well as those homes we fund, I've also been using my planning powers to increase the level of affordable housing toward my long-term target for 50% of new homes to be genuinely affordable. The proportion of new affordable homes granted planning permission halved from 26% in 2008-9 to 14% in 2015-16. In 14-15 it was 13%. Since day one, I've been working to unwind this terrible legacy. Last year we saw 34% of homes on larger schemes seeking planning permission being affordable, as our new approach begins to take hold. Despite this success, we need to go further. That's why just yesterday I announced a new council home building programme to get councils building again after years of arbitrary rules and restrictions keeping them down. This programme will contribute to the delivery of 10,000 council home starts and right to buy replacements over the next 4 years, more new homes than councils have built for decades. We must do all that we can with the powers and resources available, but I'm also clear that truly fixing the housing crisis with a step change in the number of socially rented homes and other genuinely affordable homes being built requires national government to step up. To build the affordable homes in my draft London plan, we need £2.7 billion a year of affordable housing funding, 4 times what we currently receive. At the very least, the government should immediately restore funding to the level they inherited in 2009-10, when £1.75 billion was invested in new affordable homes in London.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr Mayor. In November of 2016, the government awarded you £3.15 billion to fund the building of 90,000 affordable homes, and your press release at the time hailed it as the greatest housing deal ever secured by City Hall. Halfway through your mayoralty, GLA Housing and Land, and you've just quoted the figures, show that you've started 21,461 homes, which is less than a quarter of your own target. Has the government's investment in your mayoralty been a good one?
So we shared with the government our delivery ranges for the 4 years, so these are agreed with them. So as part of the negotiation with the government on the starts is to agree each year delivery. And so the agreement we had with the government last year was 12,500, which we've met. The delivery range over the next few years is between, so 2018-19, between 14,000 and 19,000, between 2019-2020, between 17,000 and 23,000, and over the next 2 years, 45,000 and 56,000. So they are very challenging. I'm not shying away from that. And so we'll continue to work with developers, councils, and housing associations to try and meet those targets.
To hit your target by March 2021, you're going to have to deliver, on average, 23,000 homes per year, which is almost 2,000 a month, and that's double the current run rate. So how do you plan to affect that step change?
So we've already got deals with 50,000 on starts over the next period. And the way to think about it is it's a graph it's like a tick. So it goes like that. It's a steep tick. So and it's gradual. So last year we broke the record, and we need to break it again this year, and it's going to be pretty tough. But it's, you know, I think we've got the deals with the house associations and developers for the next couple of years, and we'll see. We have each quarter we get a sort of how we're doing and stuff, and so I'm optimistic that the deals we've made will get us there, but it's going to be very challenging.
Just on one point there, factually, Mr. Mayor, you said you broke the record. The record for what?
For the number of genuinely affordable housing starts since it was devolved to City Hall.
Genuinely affordable, that's by your new definition.
Oh, we can use the dodgy one if you want. So let me use the dodgy one. So it's a record for the most affordable housing starts since it was devolved to City Hall, even using the dodgy definition. They couldn't do that.
Well, in 9-10, the figures from GLA Housing and Land were 15,629. In 10-11, 16,351. It
was devolved in 11-12.
Okay. What constitutes a housing start, Mr. Mayor?
It's a definition given by government and the construction. It's basically once there are, so it's not planning permission granted, it's when on a site there is a construction beginning on the site. It's not spade in the ground, if you see what I mean. It's when they go into a site.
Okay. Because at the end of February 2018, you'd started 6,725 homes. And by the end of the following month, that figure had apparently increased to 12,526, which you quoted earlier. So that means that in the final 4 weeks of the financial year, you'd started almost as many homes as you'd started in the previous 48 weeks. What do you attribute that to?
I think if you look at previous years, the last quarter is also often the one where there's a steep increase. Some of that is data inputting, I'm told, in relation to quarter 4. I'm not an expert in construction, but if you look at previous years, the increase does tend to be in quarter 4.
The reason I asked the question is that your minimum housing stats, and again you referred to them earlier, was for this year, was for 17-18, was between 12,500 at the low end and 16,500 at the top end, and obviously at the end of February you were not there. But the massive increase that apparently occurred in March meant that you managed to exceed your target by 26 units. Do you think the Londoners will find that credible?
Do I think?
The Londoners will find that credible?
What?
Well, that you managed in the space of 4 weeks to just about squeak over your bare minimum target.
Well, I think you mean exceeded the target. Squeak over is a nice turn of phrase, but we beat the target and we've broken the record. I'm very pleased.
By 26 units, which looks a bit convenient. Putting aside all of this, I mean, you pledged to be the most open and transparent mayor in London's history. So why have you decided to stop publishing monthly housing statistics and take a step backwards in terms of transparency?
I'm not sure I didn't realise we had.
You have. There's a letter from David Luntz, the Director of Housing and Land, addressed to me, which in it he says that it is because of your policy that the statistics will be downgraded. We're going to go for the part of the biannual government official statistics, which are normally published in June, July and November, and that means that there will be no housing start statistics published at all until November 2018.
Well, look, if you
won't be available on a monthly basis anymore.
If you're criticising me for following government advice, I take that on board. Let me go away. Can I go back to you with that? Because I wasn't aware of that. So
certainly. I mean, we're going to be asking David Luntz that question at the next budget committee.
I can't see a good reason why, if we've got the data, not to share that. So can I go away and come back to you and write you on that?
Yeah, that'll be fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Mr. Mayor, I very much welcomed the announcement yesterday about this funding to deliver 10,000 new council homes, which I think is going to be the first time the City Hall is doing something which I wanted it to do, which is specifically have funding going to funding councils directly to deliver council housing. I've got a few questions about that. One of the issues that I always find boroughs are tearing their hair out about is that these ridiculous government rules prevent them from combining their right to buy receipt money with other pots of affordable housing money to deliver new homes. Will boroughs be able to combine this funding with right to buy receipts, or will this fund council homes in a different way?
So, first, thank you for your kind words. So firstly, what we've announced with the Building Council Homes for Londoners announcement yesterday is a number of things that councils will get now they haven't got before. They'll get the skills and expertise of City Hall. They'll get flexible funding, because you're right, what councils have to do now is not simply they can't mix and match, but they've got to spend within 3 years or pay back to central government with interest 4% above base rate. And so a lot of councils give it back straight away, because if they can't do in 3 years, it's a problem. And the third thing we're doing is the special grant assistance as a consequence of the announcement in the spring statement. So it'll be a combination of those things, working with the councils, and one of the things that skills and expertise will provide is how they can fund the new councils' homes that they want to build. And Lewisham has already agreed to a deal with for 1,000 starts over the next 4 years. Waltham Forest also, by the way, came on board and have agreed to start 526 starts over the next 4 years. So one of the skills and expertise is to see how we can get the funding working.
Well, I was very pleased to see James Murray in Lewisham, of course, yesterday. So to be clear, we still really need the government as well to change the rules to allow councils to combine funding.
Just to give you an idea, look, so in the 1970s, councils with government support were building 20,000 homes a year, council homes a year. In the last 4 years, it was about 2,000, 4 years combined. And so even with 10,000 over 4 years, it's not enough. And so the government, we really need the government to assist more, but also change rules. They could allow councils to borrow more, use prudential rules. There's things they can do, how you allocate land using CPOs. There are things they can do that doesn't cost much money that will allow councils to do much, much more.
And the funding you announced yesterday, is that going to be available only to councils directly through their HRA, or will it also be available to council-owned housing companies?
What the announcement today is for councils. And the deadline for councils to put in their bids is end of September, and so I'd encourage councils to put in their bids by the end of September. There are some councils, as you know, have got separate arm's length companies. It's for council to talk to City Hall about how that works and stuff, but yeah. Okay.
And you mentioned compulsory purchase powers, CPO. We had a Conservative Party manifesto commitment to reform CPO to make it easier for councils to buy land at a fair value. It's also, I think, within the Labour Party manifesto. Why do you think that there's been no action so far from the government, given there's clearly cross-party support for this, to make it easy for councils to buy land at a fair value?
Look, with the new Secretary of State, we'll wait and see what his attitude is, but it seems to me not right that the speculation of the value of a land and the increase can lead to not simply people being deterred from buying that, but also the hurdles in the way for councils. And by the way, by CPOing small plots of land, you can make it into a bigger plot of land and do much more, freeing up a small plot of land next to a big one. And so the government really needs to look at reforming CPOs. It's not working, it's not fit for purpose.
And just finally, you'll be aware, I'm sure, of the recent High Court ruling in favour of Islington Council, that developers can't use overpaying land as an excuse for not delivering policy-compliant levels of affordable housing. Do you get a sense that this is going to have an impact around the whole of London on reducing developers overpaying for land and bringing down land prices?
This is a really important case, and I know a lot of people are claiming to be the parents of this challenge in Islington and elsewhere. But it's really important because one of the things that frustrates councils is viability and the value of land. And over a long period of time, we've got to reduce the value of land, because that's often a factor. Building a house in London or in Burnley, roughly speaking, is the same bricks, mortar, labour, roughly speaking. But the land is a big reason why it becomes more expensive. We can have some control over the land value, and this decision is really important in relation to that. Really reduce the cost of house building in London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member McCartney.
Mr Mayor, part of affordable housing, and you're particularly keen on social housing, which I think we on this side certainly are. And last year, you called on the Prime Minister to appoint a social housing commissioner to speak up for social housing tenants who often feel their voice is not listened to. What was the response from government?
So, I mean, just the reason why it's really important that I push for an independent commissioner for social housing residents is the frustration they feel at the lack of advocacy. These are tenants, leaseholders, and freeholders as well. The government have said that they'll be publishing shortly a social housing green paper, and we're looking for that, including in it this commissioner for social housing residents. I don't think there's a need for a green paper. I think it's a no-brainer. It's quite easy for the government to do. And the problem with the green paper is it then followed by a white paper, then legislation, and we know the government's focused on just one thing at the moment, which is trying to keep the party together with the Brexit stuff. And so my worries, this is another example of something that's really important and much needed being kicked into the grass.
But you and your Deputy Mayor for Housing will be pushing this at all stages?
Absolutely, and I think that James is due to meet with the new Housing Minister, Dominic Raab, shortly, but one of the things points we're making to him, and I'll make to James Brokenshire when I meet him, is the importance of social residents to have a voice. And actually, by the way, a case study in how social housing residents can be let down is when you look at what happened in the months and years preceding the horrible fire at Grenfell Tower.
Absolutely, thank you.
Assembly Member Devonish.
Mayor, I welcome your announcement on councils, but how many specific GLA full-time equivalent staff are you able to provide to support councils in this very important work?
It's a suck it and see. We've got the resources here. We've got Homes for Londoners Board. One of the things we've done is bring together in Homes for Londoners the various parts of the functional bodies, so TfL Property, the Development Corporation, property teams as well, Met Police expertise, London Fire Brigade. So we've got more resources now in City Hall, more bodies. You'll know recently we hired more experts and stuff. So some councils will be just happy with a special grant. Some will want the expertise. And so the bidding closes at the end of September, and depending what the response is, what the asks are, we'll wait and see in relation to what additional expertise we need to bring in. But we think we can do it within the resources we have, the staff we have. But it depends what comes back from the councils across London.
And of the 32 boroughs, how many do you think are actually going to engage?
I'm hoping they all engage, but it's an unknown. I mean, I'm hoping that councils of all political persuasions, but also inner outer, engage. Some councils actually realistically can't scale up quickly. Some councils may be in parts of London where they've not got the land. Others may have the land, and so we'll have to wait and see. Lewisham and Waltham Forest we were speaking to in advance of yesterday. That's why we could announce it yesterday. Those conversations haven't been had with others, but let's wait and see. But I'm optimistic because across London, I think 10,000 over 4 years is not a lot, and so I'm hoping that every council puts in a bid.
And how can you encourage, let's say, the ones that are more experienced to actually help the ones that are least experienced? Because there are ones we all know, half a dozen of them, that do this all the time, and the rest don't.
One of the things that I've been impressed by is London Council's LGA, and that there is quite a lot of collegiality. Actually, I wasn't aware of this until I became mayor. The peer-to-peer stuff that you talked about. If we can help in relation to matching up councils, we'll do that. Actually, a lot of that takes place informally anyway. Some of it, though, is about relationships, and so we can help broker the relationship between council leader, housing lead here, and council leader, housing lead there. The chief execs tend to know each other. It's the council, it's the housing leads that are the issue and stuff. But that informal stuff takes place. We need to try and broker it if need be to make it more formal.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member O'Connell.
Mr Mayor, as possibly the only Assembly member brought up on a council estate, Bellingham, wonderful place, in a family-sized council house. With this money that you will be giving to councils, will you be urging, indeed directing them, to build more family-sized council homes?
Well, the good news is because it's council homes and councils know what the housing lists are, they'd be stupid not to, because they know what the housing lists are. You'll be aware many of the families living in council homes, like my family and probably yours, and I'm not sure about Andrew's, but overcrowded in council homes. We, you know, even though there were council homes, so we need more family homes. The good news about council homes being family homes, they're unlikely to be what we see with private family homes, which is often parents without children living there, or, you know, professional singles living there and stuff. And so that's why good councils will want to build family homes.
Yeah. I urge, obviously, boroughs like Croydon and Sutton, but I urge also Lewisham. I think I put myself on the council housing list about 40-odd years ago, and I think I'm still on it. I haven't heard from them. So they're very choosy, Lewisham. Perhaps a new councillor down there will put a word in for me. Thank you, Mr Mayor, for your response.
Okay. Right, we welcome students from Year 9 of Hewins College, Hillingdon. I hope you enjoy yourselves. The next question, which is scheduled to be from Assemblymember Prince on London Underground, he will now accept a written answer for that.
Right.
So can we please then go to Assemblymember Dismore's question on immigration in London? That's 1163.
Thank you, Chair. The government's hostile environment for migrants in the UK is a national scandal. The experience of the Windrush generation have shown us that the government's policies discriminate against Londoners who have a right to be here and leave vulnerable people without access to essential services. London draws strength from the contribution of migrants who make the city their home. Migrants bring economic benefits to the capital and enrich our city, bringing cultural energy to our shared identity. But many, including thousands of children and young people who have grown up in London, face barriers to accessing their legal rights to citizenship and residence. This affects their ability to vote, access higher education and work, hold a driving licence and open a bank account. I know from my discussions with London's employers that businesses are concerned about London becoming less attractive to European and international talent. They're also worried that the political climate is damaging to London's reputation as an open, innovative and liberal economy. I share this concern. We know that European Londoners have experienced feelings of being made unwelcome, discrimination and experienced hate crime following the EU referendum. We also know there is a slowdown in European workers arriving in London for work, and recent analysis by Deloitte suggests 65% of highly skilled EU nationals working in the UK now find the country less attractive. This poses serious risk for London's economy, which relies on access to an international pool of talent to prosper and grow. Many of London's sectors rely on migrant labour to grow. For example, construction and hospitality are two of London's fastest growing sectors in the last few years in terms of jobs, but almost a third of jobs are filled by EEA migrants. Government must now take steps to avoid permanently harming London's and the nation's economy.
Well, thank you for that answer, and I very much agree with what you say, and in particular the scandalous treatment of the Windrush generation isn't just an appalling way to behave towards people who've lived here and worked here for decades perfectly legally, but it also demonstrates yet again the government's hostility to immigration. As you say, London's dependent on migrant labour, both from the EU and beyond. How can London's migrants be reassured of their welcome and future status here as against the government's hostility?
Well, I think we've all got a responsibility as Londoners to reassure our neighbours, friends and family members who are EU nationals that we value them and they're welcome here and they make a massive contribution to our city, notwithstanding some of the things national politicians may say. It's really important. Why? Because it's who we are as a city, not just over the last 40 years, but the last 1,000 years. We've been open to people, ideas, trade and talent. We've got to make sure that doesn't change. But you will know from the conversations you have that some of our neighbours, friends and family who are EU citizens are feeling scared, vulnerable, anxious, because they've seen the way the Windrush generation have been treated and are worried they could be treated the same way in the future. And that's really important that we make them reassured. At the same time, I'm lobbying the government, as I know the Assembly will want me to make sure they understand why it's important that any process that's put in place for EU citizens to become naturalised here is simple and straightforward.
Thanks for that. And isn't it the case that the cap on non-EU skilled migrant workers reached its limit for the fourth month in a row in March, when 6,000 requests for visas for skilled workers was turned down, including 1,518 doctors? So that businesses wanting to bring non-EU workers to UK now have to show salaries in excess of £60,000, and more than 80% of professional jobs actually pay less than that. And with 600,000 jobs in London carried out by non-EU workers, especially in hospitality, construction and tech, where 1 in 4 startups are co-funded by EU migrants, there's a real risk, isn't it, that the government are both misleading businesses by their claim they can access talent from non-EU countries, but also their hostility to migrants threatens us with the loss of our existing EU skilled workers, even before Brexit, never mind afterwards, because they see the writing on the wall. So
you've got a situation where you've got almost a perfect storm where there is evidence now of EU workers leaving London, going back to inverted commas country of origin. There is evidence now of fewer EU citizens coming to London, but because of the hard cap the government has on non-EU workers, we now know that businesses and the public sector are missing out on workers they need to do the jobs that need to be done in London. And you mentioned construction and hospitality, but doctors, teachers, we've got a shortage of. I saw recently, for example, that the Home Secretary had a request made to him from NHS employers about the need for a relaxation of the visa rules so skilled doctors could come to London. Big issues around teaching, of course, as well. And I think the government's obsession with the numbers is having an impact on not just people's lives, but also businesses and the public sector as well. It's a classic example of cutting your nose to spite your face, and I'd ask them to reconsider. I'm hoping a new Home Secretary will try and exert more influence on the Prime Minister, because as you will be aware, all this began from when the Prime Minister was the Home Secretary.
Thank you.
Assembly Member McCartney.
Yes, Mr Mayor, the hostile environment policy initiated under the current Prime Minister, then Home Secretary, was obviously aimed at illegal immigrants, but that seems to have fed into a hostile environment for all immigration, and we've seen the Home Office basically being very incompetent in targeting, in fact, British citizens who in many cases have been imprisoned in their home country or deported. Now, can I ask, as Mayor of London, will you be making representations to the Home Secretary that they end this hostile environment policy?
So, as you'll have expected me to do, in the first letter I wrote to the new Home Secretary, I made that very point in relation to the need for there to be a change in policy from the government and a change of tone from the government as well. I'll make this point. The hostile environment is not created by one policy by itself. It's the cumulative effect of a number of policies over a number of years, sending vans around the most diverse parts of London saying go home, expecting the NHS, teachers, landlords to be unpaid, untrained UKBA officials. This sort of chilling effect has a real impact. Victims who go to the police worried about being reported to UKBA in case they've got immigration documents aren't in order. Nobody, by the way, is excusing illegal migration. We've got to make sure we've got borders that are properly enforced. We've got to have controlled migration. But you can have a system that has controlled migration, fixed borders, proper immigration system, and one that's humane, fair and just. And when you hear the stories and meet people who've lost their job, lost their home, scared to get treatment at the NHS or being turned away, it's heartbreaking.
Good. And on that, it does not give me any confidence that with Brexit coming and the registration of EU nationals, particularly young people, that they are going to have an efficient system. Is that something that you can speak to the Home Secretary about on behalf of all Londoners?
One of the first things I called for from the government when the referendum vote had happened was the importance for the government to give EU nationals a cast-iron guarantee of their right to stay here post-Brexit. Instead, the government chose to use them as bargaining chips to try and negotiate with the European Union. There are 1 million Londoners, they're Londoners by the way, who are EU citizens, roughly speaking 3 million across the country, more than 3.3 million, who are EU citizens who are now worried about their future in this country. We've got to make sure that the process, the paperwork is straightforward. For example, how many of us could have found 4 pieces of documentation for every year living in a place to show, to satisfy the authorities in relation to the Windrush generation? And so it's got to be an easy system, and I'm hoping the government realises that actually many of us don't leave lives where we have documentation to prove where we lived and stuff, but there are other databases available, whether it's DVLA, DWP, National Insurance, which can provide the corroboration if need be the government needs, but it should be an easy system to get these EU nationals the certainty they need.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Eshalomi to ask a question on developer-funded transport.
After 7 years of government cuts to the TfL budget, TfL has had to look for other ways to secure the funding it needs to maintain and enhance the transport network. This includes funding from the developers who benefit from transport investment alongside those who use the transport network. In my transport strategy, I've been clear that London needs a new approach to funding and delivering the transport network. This should include measures such as land value capture and devolving financial powers to local level. These changes will be essential to delivering an efficient and fair funding system. All new developments in London above a certain size, apart from health and education, are subject to a mayoral community infrastructure levy charge. The proceeds from this are paid to the Elizabeth Line project. Developer contributions through Section 106 money also help to make sure developers pay their fair share. The arrangements at Battersea were put together some years ago and would not meet my current policies for developer contributions and affordable housing. I'd expect to hold future developers to higher standards. The additional costs to the Northern Line extensions have been caused by significant changes made by the Battersea Power Station developer to the design of the development above the station at Battersea. More ambitious structures than were originally agreed have meant substantial changes are needed for the new tube station to function properly. This has led to an increase in the overall cost of the project. TfL is in discussions with Battersea Power Station developers to recover these additional costs.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. And given that this issue has been going on for almost 2 years now, how much of that 240 million do you want the developers to pay? And again, you know, when do you think that this is going to be resolved?
Well, I mean, this is a commercially sensitive matter, so it's not appropriate for me to discuss details and stuff, but the point is that the additional work that we've had to do has been undertaken because of changes made by the developers, so we expect them to pay for those changes, but the conversations / discussions are ongoing, and so let's wait and see what happens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been going through the TfL board papers for the meeting next week, and there are some worrying figures in there. So in terms of, one of the things was around passenger income has dropped by 3% to 4.6 billion. Passenger numbers continue to fall as well. I'm sure you'll know the Bakerloo line, which we will see, the extension in Southwark, is very much something that we're looking forward to. One of the consultations where TfL received the most response. And, you know, given that there are funding problems on the Northern Line, which we still haven't resolved, how are you going to ensure that, you know, we will make sure we get funding and contribution from developers so that we don't see similar situations happening on the Bakerloo Line extension?
Well, one of the things that we're working with the Treasury on is how we can have innovative new ways to fund infrastructure projects in London. Crossrail 1 was very exciting in relation to the funding regime. Central government taxation, London government taxation, developers less so, but businesses in London, business rate supplement and SIL as well, really big contribution. On the Bakerloo line, we've done some work about what sort of funding models may work. The good news is that the two boroughs there, Southwark and Lewisham, have been fantastic in working with us in relation to seeing how we can get the sums to add up in relation to the Bakerloo line extension. They have proposed higher borough SIL tariffs, community infrastructure levy tariffs. But even with those tariffs, there's a gap between the funding we need for the Bakerloo line extension, the monies TfL can give. And so we're looking at other ways to try and fill that gap. But you're right, the Bakerloo line extension is much needed. And we've got to think about ways to pay for that infrastructure.
And just finally, you may have seen in the Times reported today that the budget for Crossrail is going over by 500 million. And one of the things that Val mentioned was that the delays to the Elizabeth line will be a big impact on TfL's revenue if it doesn't open. So where are we going to find that extra money?
So the Crossrail line project is a project that costs, roughly speaking, £15 billion. And there is a contingency built into the Crossrail line project, which I think is roughly speaking £500–600 million. It's 92% complete. There are various checks taking place, and we are on schedule for the central part, as was planned, to open in December this year, for the entire line to open in December next year. And my understanding is that the Secretary of State will be making a statement in the next few weeks about any potential overruns and stuff. But the project's going according to plan. The last bit's always the most difficult. We know this from previous projects. Previous transport infrastructure projects have been extremely delayed, extremely over budget. In a budget of £15 billion, 92% complete. You know, I think I still speak very proudly about the Crossrail project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Copley's question is withdrawn. So the next question relates to tall buildings, which will be asked by Assemblymember O'Connell. Actually, Mr. Boff has returned. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
There are controls on tall building developments through the planning system. The GLA officers subject proposals for tall buildings to rigorous design assessment at both the pre-application stage and again when they're formally referred to the GLA, the point at which I'm consulted. Proposals are assessed on their individual merits on a case-by-case basis. Officers focus on the architectural quality of the proposed building, its impact on strategic, local and long-range views, its impact on heritage assets and the building's relationship with the immediate townscape at street level. In addition, tall building applications undergo detailed scrutiny by the local planning authority. Yes, I think we can go further to improve the controls we have over tall buildings, which is why the new draft London plan sets out a more rigorous approach to ensuring new tall buildings are in appropriate, sustainable locations, that they're safe, and their full impacts are assessed. In consultation with local communities, I want boroughs to take greater responsibility for determining where tall buildings can be located. I want them to carry out a thorough evaluation of the existing character and context of individual areas. The visual, functional, environmental and cumulative impacts of tall buildings will be assessed in detail to determine if a tall building is acceptable on a particular site. The new draft London plan makes it clear that all tall buildings must make a positive contribution at street level and to the skyline. It is also clear that careful account must be taken of the way buildings relate to activities at ground floor level, as well as the effect they have on local daylight, wind turbulence, glare and noise. Proposals for tall buildings should expect the highest level of scrutiny and adhere to the most exacting standards. The new plan also requires all tall building proposals to undergo a design review process by an independent panel before an application is submitted to guide better design outcomes.
Thank you for that. You've expressed concerns that we need good growth as a part of the London plan. And your manifesto committed you to ensuring that tall buildings respected local character. Would you agree that one of the requirements that there should be in place for a tall building to be accepted, that it should only really be considered where it's supported by a local master plan, therefore ensuring that rigorous inspection and analysis of whether or not such a building is required?
That's an interesting point, because I think one of the things we're keen to do is to get boroughs more involved in these tall buildings, and boroughs may want to develop a master plan in relation to the particular area. Sometimes tall buildings can be built on pieces of land that aren't very big and aren't necessarily part of an area that would be deemed there to be need for a master plan, but in principle I think it's not a bad idea to have a master plan on strategic sites in a borough. They can often really benefit. I was in Croydon yesterday. Steve knows the area well, but in Croydon Town Centre, the East Croydon master plan provides a really good template, and there's tall buildings there, and I think the master plan has helped. So it's an interesting point. I can see the merits in that.
Well, this is going rather well. I don't expect it. Do you think you could therefore consider strengthening the current London plan to make this a requirement?
Well, as you know, there's a consultation process that's finished now. There'll be the public inquiry stages, which will take place in here in City Hall. And so I'm sure that those are some of the points that will be made, and they'll be heard by the City Hall team. But, East Croydon was a good example yesterday of the master plan leading to sensible, short, medium to long-term strategic thinking about that town centre. Yeah,
I was going to ask another question which might be a bit more divisive, but I kind of think I'm going to stop while we're agreeing. Thank you very much.
Assemblymember Gavron.
Peace and love.
Architecture has just produced its annual review of what's happening to tall buildings in terms of statistics in London, and it's now jumped. The numbers have jumped to 500, and I wondered whether, and by the way, an increasing number in outer London, and I wondered what view you had of that, and whether you thought the new London plan would make any difference in terms of these jumps in numbers.
I've not seen that number. The number that I've seen is the number of tall buildings granted planning permission in 2016 and 2017 was about half the number approved in 2014 and 2015. So I'm not sure if...
It's true. Let me just, I should have explained. That number is those that are under construction,
exactly,
have been given permission
previously
and are imminently coming to planning, are in the pipeline. It doesn't include others that will come that we know about around some of the Crossrail stations, or indeed later on in the Bakerloo, around the Bakerloo extensions. So it's ones that are in the pipeline, but they're imminent or under construction. It's quite true. I mean, I absolutely agree with what you said. The numbers have dropped in terms of permissions. But I just wondered, so what you thought, how that trend would continue.
Well, I mean, I think the important thing is for there to be good quality, good design, for them to respect the streetscape, the skyline, to make sure they deal with issues like wind and glare, but also for the borough to play a big role in relation to the suitability of a tall building in a particular site. I think tall buildings do have a huge role to play, particularly around transport hubs and town centres,
Yes.
the right sort of tall buildings, but they've got to be of good quality and good design.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I wanted to say that having looked at the London plan, your latest one, and I've been very involved in the evolution of tall buildings policy, it began as being about economic clusters, and this time, for the first time, you talk about the potential contribution of tall buildings to housing supply. And I just noticed that the New London architecture say that some boroughs have now got the equivalent of 5 or 6 years' supply of homes or flats in tall buildings to meet their targets. And given that 90% of these 500 tall buildings are residential, would it not be a good idea to have a little bit more guidance in the London plan about the importance of tall buildings meeting real housing need as opposed to just numbers?
It's really important. I mean, I've said on a number of occasions that the need to build the right sort of homes, in other words, genuinely affordable homes, market value homes, and the right sorts of homes that we need as a city. I think that's quite clear in my draft housing strategy, and also in the draft of the plan. The expectation is there about what we expect in relation to affordable homes.
So you want to see the tall buildings meeting your affordable homes, your mixed communities, because often they're monoculture, your family housing priorities?
Oh yeah. I mean, just because homes are built in a tall building doesn't exclude them from the responsibility to provide affordable homes. And so, we've seen a number of schemes where there are homes in tall buildings, and there is a significant number of affordable homes, genuinely affordable homes. We're also seeing build to rent, and so the key thing is to make sure that developers understand that the expectation is for there to be 50% of affordable homes. It's in the draft London plan. There is a fast track route that they're well aware of, which avoids all the viability issues and stuff. But no, but I don't think your responsibility to provide affordable homes is gone because you're developing a tall building.
I'm very pleased to hear that, but I do think there should be more guidance in the London plan in that case, in relation to tall buildings, not just in housing policy, because we're just seeing too many tall buildings where the cheapest flat is 1 million, usually a one bed,
well,
and the most expensive is 15 million. The average is 7 million.
Sure. Well, in those cases, the council shouldn't be granting permission, because the councils will know the expectation on them is, and if a building is above a certain height, it comes to me, or more than 150 units, it comes to me, and we get to see it. And we've increased, in answer to a previous question asked by Senator Bacon, the large sites, 34% in my first year were affordable, compared in contrast to 14% the year before. So we've already seen an increase in affordable homes, and by virtue of them coming to me, they're either tall buildings or buildings of a large area.
Thank you.
Next question is from Assembly Member Hall and relates to London being open.
Thank you. The London is Open campaign promotes London as an open, tolerant and inclusive city to businesses, visitors and Londoners. Following Brexit, there has been concerns about the future of the capital. The campaign has helped reassure the world that London remains entrepreneurial, international and full of possibility. In 2017, the London is Open campaign cost £35,202.75. The value of the London is Open campaign has far outweighed the cost, with worldwide press and social media coverage and significant support from public figures and businesses. Campaign ambassadors' support has included featuring in London is Open films and photographs, social media support and branding at venues and events. Events have included the MTV Europe Music Awards, which used London is Open to showcase London to a domestic and international audience. The London is Open films have been viewed over 5 million times and shared over 40,000 times. The London is Open hashtag has been tweeted more than 488,000 times by more than 250,000 people worldwide. We've used the London is Open message during overseas visits and trade missions to signify that our city remains open to business, investment, talent, ideas and partnership. Leading examples include 5,500 articles on London and Partners autumn season during 2016-2017, 1,700 articles on the India and Pakistan trip, 1,039 articles on the Europe trip, including coverage in France, Spain and Germany. The 2018 Grant Thornton India Meets Britain tracker reports that London is surging ahead as UK's leading investment destination, with more than half of all Indian companies invested in the UK, 53% choosing London. This is up from 44% in 2017, 39% in 2016 and 25% in 2015. Grant Thornton credited increase partly to the London is Open message that myself and Deputy Mayor of Business Rajesh Agrawal promoted during our trade and business trip there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you believe that this campaign has led to London becoming a more welcoming business environment for international investors?
By itself, no, but as part of a package of other measures that we've been undertaking, yeah.
Oh, good. Regarding international investors, do you agree with Paul Dreschler, the CBI president, who said that nationalisation would cause serious harm to London's reputation as a welcoming place for international investors?
I've not seen that quote, but I see Chris Grayling disagrees because he yesterday decided to renationalise East Coast mainland. I welcome that, and it's good to see the East Coast being renationalised, and it's good to see Chris Grayling being somebody who agrees with our sensible policy. But I don't agree with that quote you just read out.
Well, no, I think that's a temporary measure because it had to be done temporarily. But so do you approve then of nationalisation?
So TfL is a good example of nationalisation. Boris Johnson renationalised AME tube lines, brought them back into state control, the mayor, and TfL, the buses, the tubes, London Overground, the trams are nationalised essentially. The mayor has political control of them, albeit I get private companies to run some of those services. I think if we had Southern, South East and South Western brought under our control, we could provide a much better service. I don't think necessarily all public is good and all private is bad. I'm in favour of partnership between public and private, but I think sometimes services being nationalised is a good thing. I think the railways being nationalised would lead to huge improvements in the rail network, would lead to huge benefits to the taxpayer, would lead to fewer industrial relations problems, and would be a benefit to the British public.
Well, quite a few cost analysts have been at this, and we've been finding figures of it could cost up to £306 billion. If I go back to Paul Dreschler saying, the CBI president saying, that it would cause serious harm to London's reputation. Are you not concerned about that?
And I think Transport for London is a good example of where being under the control of the mayor, politician, has led to improved services, and I'm really proud of that.
So you are for nationalisation then, despite it being told to us that it would be harmful for London?
Nationalisation applies to lots of things. So I'm not clear what Paul was referring to in his quote. Was Paul referring to nationalising everything? That's not my view. If he's referring to nationalising some things, like
even if we look at the energy and water businesses in London, even if we just look at those, well, apparently, according to the experts, they say it would be very damaging and not be good for a welcoming place for international investors, which clearly we want international investors in London.
If you're of the view that Thames Water have done a fantastic job in the recent past, I suspect you're in the minority. If you're of the view that the privatised energy companies are providing value for money, particularly to the poorest Londoners, I suspect you'd be in the minority. I'm of the view that actually the privatised companies, particularly utilities, have been taking advantage of the monopolies they hold, and it's about time they were held to account.
And Mr. Mayor, if you're of the view that experts like presidents of the CBI have actually got it wrong, then I am very concerned, because that's what they're the experts in.
Can I just say this,
Chair?
Chair?
They are very concerned about this.
I find it quite remarkable that somebody who wanted to avoid experts during the Brexit campaign and we're having to pick up the pieces now wants to rely upon experts when it comes to nationalising the utilities, but hey-ho. We live in fun times.
You shouldn't be
Well,
bringing it
I'm
back
glad
to
we're
Brexit
having a
or-
sort of happy debate now on philosophical matters. But I think perhaps we should be dealing with matters clearly connected to London.
Okay, so you're happy with nationalisation in London, despite it being told to us that it would be bad for London?
Which
Thank
services do
you,
you mean?
Mayor. Thank you.
I'm not sure which... sorry.
It was an entertaining interlude, Mr Mayor. Assembly Member Dismore, question on welfare. I beg your pardon. Assembly Member Shah wants to join in.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair. I only got 2 minutes, very brief comment from response from you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I do see London is open for business campaign as a gateway to inward investment. But are you aware of a potential conflict at the Silvertown Keys development that risks damaging relationship with a major overseas investor and sending a message that London is not open for some? The issue at Silver Keys appears to be one of transparency. It's unclear as to who is making decisions about investment into publicly owned land and how they are arriving at those decisions. Can I have your quick response, please?
I'm not sure of the example you're referring to, but I'm happy to look into it if there's a particular example you refer to and stuff, but it's really important we do things properly, so I'm not sure what you mean.
I have been in conversation with your team as well as GLA, and this is something I would like you to look into because matter is of urgent nature. So can you please investigate the issue as a matter of urgency and pause the process to ensure that a transparent and proper process is observed? Can you please come back to me on this when you've investigated?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Now Assembly Member Dismore on welfare reform.
The government's welfare reforms have had a disproportionate effect on Londoners and have pushed some of the most vulnerable to crisis point. Over 1 million households in the capital have been affected by the freezes to working age benefits, most of which are still in place. More than 15,000 London households have also seen their income slashed as a result of the benefit cap, leaving many unable to meet the rapidly increasing cost of living. And more than 2,500 tenants claiming universal credit are so far behind on their rent, they're at risk of eviction. But it doesn't stop there. Local housing allowances are still fall well short of average private rents, putting many at risk of eviction or homelessness. And the reallocation of the discretionary housing payment budget has hampered the ability of London boroughs to help those at risk of losing their home. In March, the Equality and Human Rights Commission released a cumulative impact assessment of welfare and tax reforms since 2010. They forecast that 5.9 million children in Great Britain will be living in poverty by 2022, compared to 4.4 if the reforms had not taken place. It's unacceptable that the safety net that should be protecting the most vulnerable is in fact pushing many further into poverty. Over the coming months, City Hall will be doing work to understand which groups in London are most at risk from the reforms to allow me to better advocate on their behalf.
Well, thank you for that answer. I mean, oblivious to the administrative problems and real hardship it's causing, the Conservative government is forcing through the switch to the universal credit regime in most of the rest of London. By the end of the year, in Barnet it's just started, in Camden it starts at the end of the year. So it's descending on the job centre near you. Given that both social and private landlords are reporting massive increases in rent arrears in areas already subject to universal credit, alongside other indicators of real poverty like food bank usage, homelessness, and the use of expensive payday loans, do you support an inquiry into the administration of universal credit?
Well, look, I mean, if you look at what the select committees have said about universal credit, look at what MPs have said, look at what the Trust have said, look at what advice services have said. I think, for me, it's an open and shut case of the problems with universal credit being rolled out. Put aside whether it's a good or bad thing, and I think the principle of simplifying the benefit system must be one that we agree with, but clearly, in the execution, there's been errors made, and those which have had pilots, including in London, have caused huge problems. So, look, if it's the case the government's not willing to listen to select committees, MPs, experts, advice groups, charities, and others, then I think the inquiry into the administration of universal credit is one that I support.
Yeah, thank you for that. And of the hundreds of thousands of people now transferred to universal credit, 39% are in work on low pay. New universal credit claimants receive significantly less than they would have done under tax credits due to this government scheme to cut 12 billion from the Social Security bill. The Resolution Foundation think tank estimates that low-income working households will be more than £1,000 a year worse off when they move on to universal credit. You mentioned the Trestle Trust report on the impact of universal credit, and the government claimed that it's anecdotal evidence from a small self-selecting sample, and they say that universal credit is working for the vast majority who claim it. Who do you think's right? Charities that work to help desperately hungry people day in, day out, or government ministers in Whitehall?
Well, the minister, it's worth reminding that the ministers we're talking about, so the government's homelessness minister herself claimed that welfare reforms had not had an effect on the increasing number of rough sleepers. And that just flies in the face of all the evidence of experts. So given the choice of believe in a minister like that or believe in the Trestle Trust, who do remarkable work with the food banks they provide, but they've done some empirical evidence there, frontline charities, advice agencies, local authorities, select committees, anybody who saw the recent dispatch investigation, I simply think that the government's got to understand the scale of this problem and delay the rollout of universal credit, because I think it will lead to huge misery to many, many more Londoners. And by the way, a lot of these Londoners are doing the right thing, they're working. It's in-work poverty, and it's causing huge problems. We know now that there are landlords who are now not letting their properties to somebody who they think is in receipt of universal credit. But we also know that, according to the dispatches programme, that 2/3 of the government's own frontline staff who work in the job centres you're referring to think universal credit should be paused.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And the next question is from Assembly Member Twycross on the increase in food bank usage.
I've always been clear that in a city as prosperous as London, people shouldn't have to rely on food banks or charity to feed themselves. There is a clear link between food poverty and government policy. Benefits delays and changes to benefits account for a massive 42% of primary referrals to Trestle Trust food banks. And food banks' use has increased by 50% in areas where universal credit is rolled out. This is simply unacceptable. I outlined some shocking figures in my earlier response to Assembly Member Dismore about the disproportionate impact that the government's welfare reforms have had on Londoners. I've already written to the government urging them to take action over universal credit. I'm currently working with London boroughs to understand more about the impacts on families, local authorities and charities, not least as we know that people who are already struggling to make ends meet are disproportionately affected by benefits changes. My draft London food strategy was launched last week for 8 weeks consultation. It includes a focus on food insecurity as one of its priorities to help all Londoners to access adequate amounts of food for themselves and their families. I hope that the consultation on the draft food strategy will help us find new ways to work in partnership on food poverty. I'll also continue to support community food growing networks, including Capital Growth, which has more than 2,700 community food growing spaces all over London, allowing people to get involved in their communities, grow healthy food and learn new skills. And also, I'll continue to support the Mayor's Fund for London to deliver kitchen social, school holiday clubs offering activities and a healthy meal to children from low-income households.
Thank you. I was really pleased to see that your draft London food strategy contains a whole chapter on reducing food insecurity. What do you think will be the biggest challenges to achieving your aims in the strategy?
I think one of the things that we've got to recognise is actually there is a big willingness of people want to do the right thing, want to help out, want to help address the challenges that I referred to in my answer to your question, the question to Senator Dismore. We've got to make sure we make it accessible for people to get good quality food. I mean, you'll have seen the campaign, you'll have seen the proposals in relation to tackling child obesity. So we've got a situation where in some parts of London you can't access nutritional, healthy food. You're exposed to adverts for fast food. And we also know actually that in London is one of the most dynamic, innovative places. And so the challenge is going to be is getting people who are suffering welfare benefits cuts, but also the exposure to fast food adverts, getting the right sorts of foods on the low incomes that they have. And that means working together with charities, NGOs, local authorities, spotting the right families who need our help.
Thank you. And you mentioned the recent report from the Trestle Trust, which was based on interviews with their clients, which indicated that universal credit just simply isn't enough to live on. And one of the cruelest measures in the context of universal credit has to be the fact that entitlement is sort of based on age rather than need. this leads to the bizarre situation where a young single parent would receive less money for them and their child than someone just a few years older, and neither would actually be getting enough to live on. So I welcome your support for the inquiry, as mentioned, to Andrew Dismore, but one of the issues is that we already have enough evidence of the problems already, and the government simply haven't done enough. I know that in the past you've written to the Secretary of State about this, and I wondered whether you were going to contact him again to urge him to rethink.
Well, the response from the Secretary of State wasn't promising.
No.
The last time I wrote to him, but there's a reshuffle. Then I think S. McFay responded, and there seems to be a difficulty getting the message across that universal credit isn't doing enough to support young people. In-work conditionality for single parents with young children is leaving many at risk of sanctions. You know the requirements around the youth obligation. You know the lower housing payments to young people. And so, as it is, London is not a cheap place to live in, and for younger people it's becoming really difficult. And so I'm always lobbying ministers when I get the opportunity to do so about some of the challenges facing our city because of the policies they're making, and I'll continue to do so.
I was raised a particular issue about care leavers as well, and the sort of impact on them. So if you could raise issues around that would be much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Gavron's question on tall buildings is withdrawn, so we now move to Assemblymember Berry's question relating to the signing off funding for estate demolition.
Thank you, Chair. I firmly believe residents should be at the heart of plans for estate regeneration. That principle runs throughout Better Homes for Local People, my good practice guide to estate regeneration published in February, the first time any Mayor of London has produced such a guide with clear conditions and expectations. I expect all landlords planning estate regeneration schemes in London to approach them in line with the principles I have set out. Where estate regeneration involves demolition, I believe ballots should be used to ensure resident support. I simply do not have powers to insist on ballots on all estate regeneration schemes. However, I've now published in draft and consulted on a groundbreaking way to make a positive ballot a condition for my funding going into significant schemes involving any demolition. The Good Practice Guide has now been published, and the final version of the funding condition will be published and applied once City Hall has analysed the many responses received through the consultation on the draft condition. During this period, I wanted to prevent any funding for new schemes being agreed before the final version of the new condition is in effect. That's why no GLA contracts for new schemes have been or will be signed from the day the proposed funding condition was published more than 3.5 months ago to until after the final version of the new conditions has been adopted. Clearly, it was not possible to withhold funding before the draft policy was published. Decisions to fund some of these schemes were made many months ahead of formal contracts being signed. In the case of some schemes, the principle of GLA providing funding was established years ago. Even for estate regeneration schemes that may not be subject to the new funding condition, whether because their funding has been agreed in the past or because they're not seeking funding for any programme, I nonetheless urge landlords to consider undertaking a ballot.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I understand there's a process of decision-making that needs to be worked through, but I think a lot of people feel like you're trying to wriggle out of letting them have a ballot on a bit of a technicality in regards to the timeline. And if I can just sort of run through that as quickly as I can. The consultation on your draft guidance ended on the 14th of March 2017. You were considering the responses. At MQT in August, I chased you for it, and you said the final guidance would be published soon. I chased for it again in January at MQT, and then you published the new guidance on the 2nd of February. A lot of schemes were signed off very late during that period between you publishing the draft and publishing the final guidance. 16 schemes had their funding signed off on or after the 1st of December 2017. And it's those people that I think really feel aggrieved. And obviously there was a big gap between you getting the responses to the consultation and publishing the new policy. So I've got two questions for the people on those estates where you signed off this funding very late in the process. When did you really decide to change the policy after you received the consultation responses? And for these estates, why didn't you announce in February which estates were already signed off? Those people, they heard the new policy and they were full of hope that they would get a ballot. And it was very late in March, that they found out that actually their funding had been signed off. Why didn't you put that information out there at the time?
Okay, so just make sure I understand the point. So the suggestion is that I should retrospectively stop those schemes which had been negotiated and agreed, not receive them because of the practice guidance published in February. You're not allowed to do that. So
My question was, when did you decide you were going to change the policy? Not when did you, there was the run-up to it being published, but you must have decided to do it much earlier. Similar to what you said about the funding, there was a process of you making a decision.
There was a consultation process. There was then a general election call that nobody foresaw. There was then a long PERDA process. There was then the Grenfell Tower, which led to us re-examining some of the responses, and then we published the final report in February. So the process was ongoing and stuff. Some Assembly members would be very quick to criticise me, the Mayor, if on consulted on plans to improve consultation, I didn't do proper consultation. And so it's very important, bearing in mind we're consulting on how you consult residents when it comes to estate regeneration, that you consult properly. And I won't apologise for consulting properly. And actually, we've now got a situation where on any estate regeneration, where the developer is removing even one social home and wants funding from City Hall, they'll be required for the first time to undertake a ballot compulsorily. Separately, I'm using planning powers because I can't use this condition for planning powers to say if you remove even one social home, you've got to replace it, and the expectation is there to be more social homes replaced as a consequence of estate regeneration.
If we can
That's an improvement.
Stick to these schemes in the meantime, though, because during that period, you were negotiating with the councils and the housing associations. The residents, they won't get their ballots.
But that's inaccurate. No, you can't mislead people. No, some of these schemes were schemes that had been agreed when the previous mayor was in position, but were signed later on. Some of the schemes were schemes that were negotiated and agreed before we began the consultation, and some of the schemes were agreed after the consultation began. But you're
so what I'm asking you to do, so a very short time, is
you're suggesting.
Will you publish? I need to ask you this question.
Well, and I need to answer your previous question, which is your suggestion that somehow we tried to delay publishing the final guidance to rush through these schemes is just not correct.
So in order to clear that up, can you publish the decision-making documents for these schemes, the 16 schemes from December, including the evidence you asked for that would demonstrate resident support in the absence of a ballot? I understand you're not going to give them a ballot. Can you publish the evidence that the residents were in support of those schemes? Because that's your manifesto commitment. Your manifesto commitment wasn't for ballots, it was for resident support to be established.
So what I've done is publish for the first time ever a good practice from City Hall. What I've done is for the first time ever make it a requirement of funding for there to be a compulsory ballot if there's an estate regeneration. And what I've required if there's a demolition of one home. Will you give these residents
the transparency they need to see?
And what I've also said is I'll use my planning powers to make sure if there is a loss of social homes, they've got to be replaced like for like with the expectation of there being more, not less.
Okay. Thank you very much. And the next question is from Assembly Member Cooper. Energy company obligations.
Thank you, Chair. It's staggering that 10% of Londoners are still living in fuel poverty, including 119,000 households with children. The government's welfare changes have hit Londoners disproportionately hard, but I'm determined to do what I can to change this for the better. As part of my Energy for Londoners programme, I'm running the Warmer Home Schemes, which offers free insulation and new boilers to Londoners living in fuel poverty, funding boroughs to run referral services, setting up a new fuel poverty advisory group, and I'll publish my final fuel poverty action plan shortly. But we can't tackle this alone. As you suggest, the government needs to commit further funding and support to make this happen. However, the government's energy company obligation is yet another example of where Londoners are subsidising the rest of the country, just like the Clean Air Fund and renewable energy feed-in tariffs, but not getting the benefit. Like all households in Great Britain, Londoners pay for the energy company obligation through their energy bills, contributing more than 13% to the total cost of ECO nationally. However, ECO activity in London constitutes only 7% of national heating and insulation measures. London's fair share of ECO is estimated to be around £80 million per year, excluding inflation for the 2018-2022 phase. Yet ECO activity in London constitutes only 7% of the national total. I made the case for a fair share for London in my response to the recent consultation on the next phase of the energy company obligation. Government has proposed rural areas will have a sub-regional target, and it's only right that this is also applied to urban areas which have different but equally difficult challenges. I proposed that 13% of ECO should be allocated to a London regional obligation, and that this allocation should be fully devolved to City Hall, to at least the same extent as the new powers given to the Scottish Government. We have successfully lobbied for the GLA to be included as a local authority in draft regulations, which were recently consulted on, which allow us to designate a wider group of households for ECO funding. It's now essential that government commits to this in their final plans. I've written to the Secretary of State to highlight this issue, and my Deputy Mayor will continue to press ministers for a meeting.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and I'm really glad to hear that you've been pressing for the sub-regional target, and I wonder if you would be prepared to share the content of your correspondence with government, because I think it's really important that the underfunding of not just households with children, but also people who are sick and poor in London. We've just been having a discussion in our questions about overuse of food banks, the impact on Londoners of the welfare reforms. Earlier on we were talking about the need for more housing at lower rents. But of course, you know, the massive costs that a number of Londoners are paying, particularly in the private rented sector and elsewhere, and those Londoners who are in those, you know, vulnerable households. It would be really good to know that the government is going to give us our fair share of ECO and when that might happen.
Well, I'm happy to share correspondence, Chair, with Senator Member Cooper, and any assistance the Assembly can give to lobby the government as well would be much welcome, including, if it's possible, on a cross-party basis, lobbying the relevant ministers, I think, because it can't be right that, you know, people don't realise outside London that in London there's huge poverty. There are pockets of massive poverty within London. There's a perception that we're all wealthy in London and stuff, and so if people realise that actually we contribute hugely towards this fund, we receive about half of what we contribute when we actually need more than what we contribute. That, I think, changed minds. So any help the Assembly can give would be appreciated, and of course I'll share with you what we've submitted to the government.
That would be very welcome. And I just wanted to also raise the point of the fact that Scotland has been further ahead. How likely is it that we're going to have the strength and powers that we need to be able to make this happen in London as well?
Well, the good news is, in relation to the recent consultation consulting GLA, the government agreed we should be in the draft regulation. So that bodes well for setting a precedent. We've got to make the point in relation to you know, London. London's population is, if you add Scotland plus Wales together, we exceed that. And you know, we've got lots of people who are in fuel poverty in London. So I'm always an optimist, and let's see if we can persuade the government. And I think cross-party support from the Assembly will help.
I'm sure we'll ask you more about the very welcome Fuel Poverty Action Plan when we come to discuss the environment strategy, but thank you very much for that. Thank you, Chair.
Would the Assembly please agree to suspend standing orders so that we can finish the remaining business on the agenda? Agreed. Thank you very much. And the next question is from Assembly Member Curtin and relates to President Trump's visit.
Thank you, Chair. The safety of any visitor to London, including President Trump, is of course paramount. As the nation's capital and seat of government, London has long experience of preparing for visits from heads of state, including presidents of the United States. Just last month, a significant police operation was put in place to successfully ensure the safety of the 53 member states attending the first full Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting held in London in almost 40 years. The Met is working closely with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and other key partners to ensure the President's visit can take place safely. As you'd expect with any high-profile visit from a head of state, risks or potential threats are always carefully assessed, and an appropriate policing plan is then put in place that mitigates those risks. I'll of course be discussing the event with the Commissioner of the Met Police and have every confidence in the operational policing response. In coming to London, President Trump will experience an open and diverse city that has always chosen unity over division and hope over fear. There could well be a demonstration or two. If there are, the Met and I are committed to ensuring this happens in a peaceful and lawful manner. There is a significant policing cost attributed to any such event of this scale. This is an example of the disproportionate cost of policing that falls on London as the nation's capital, which central government continually refused to sufficiently fund through the National and International Capital City Grant, which is currently given only half, £170 million of the £340 million it costs Londoners. I'll continue to press government to ensure that London is fully funded to ensure we have enough police officers to keep our city safe and secure.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Mayor, and I'm very glad that you're taking the safety and security of the President seriously. It's vital that this trip is successful because the President Trump is a good president. He's going to visit this country, and it's going to open up many opportunities for trade and increasing the relationship we have with him. But the concern that people have, Mr. Mayor, is that the words that you've said as Mayor, as the Police and Crime Commissioner, in actually talking about loud protests, could be seen by some to be encouraging protests which may be unruly to the President when he comes. Don't you think that you should have been a little bit more responsible in your use of words and not actually using your airtime to be saying, oh, in a jokey way, oh, there could be protests, there may well be loud protests, because that may be courting trouble during the President's visit?
Can I just, Chair, the Assembly member rightly reminded politicians of the importance of the words they use. And so when a politician uses words like this, Tory and Labour politicians are busy blaming each other, but as usual are too politically correct to even consider mentioning the root causes of knife violence, a surge in migration of young people from parts of Somalia and Congo, with a culture where extreme violence is normal and on a completely different level to anything known before in the UK. That's an example of language being used in a way that I think is dangerous. And my point to you is this: is there any problem in this country that isn't the fault of immigration?
Well, I mean, this is Mayor's question time, so I'm asking you the questions rather than you asking me the questions. And obviously you sit in a party that has got large problems with anti-Semitism, and you sit in a party that tolerates an MP who once retweeted that the victims of abuse in Rotherham should shut their mouths for the sake of diversity. So I think those are very, very dangerous words from people in your own party. So I wouldn't throw stones when you live in a greenhouse. But you
the idea of being lectured about racism by a UKIP representative.
You seem...
I mean...
But you seem to have, a certain personal animosity to President Trump, and you know he's coming to this country. He's coming on a visit to this country. I wonder why you single out one particular head of state for negative comments when we have other...
Listen, please, members of the Assembly, UKIP has time to say whatever they wish without it being limited by you interrupting.
We have other heads of state visiting this country this year. We had the head of state of Saudi Arabia visiting this country. You said nothing about Saudi Arabia's policies and culture in that visit. And you've said, when you were talking about President Trump, Londoners hold their liberal values of freedom of speech very dear. And you also mentioned, when you're grandstanding around the world, when you went to France, you said a woman should be allowed to wear whatever she likes. But in Saudi Arabia, that's not the case. When the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia came to visit London, you missed an opportunity to stand up for women's rights and freedom of speech, particularly freedom of religious belief in Saudi Arabia, which is very restricted. Why do you keep mentioning President Trump, but you decided not to say anything about those issues in Saudi Arabia? What's the difference?
Well, the difference is this: we have a special relationship with the USA. They're our best friends. We don't have the same special relationship with these other countries. And I think one of the responsibilities when you are a best friend is to stand shoulder to shoulder at times of adversity, but to call them out when they are wrong. I appreciate some people like to be sycophants all the time. I believe it's important, though, to call out your best friend when they're wrong. And I think it's out of order amplifying tweets of Britain First. I think it's out of order amplifying racist tweets that divide our communities, and you should be ashamed as UKIP representative to defend that behaviour.
UKIP's time has expired, Mr Mayor. Assembly Member Devonish.
Unfortunately.
Assembly Member Devonish.
Mr Mayor, I wanted to make a different point, really, but I do agree with David in one thing. We do need to dial down the rhetoric on both sides. You would agree that Londoners in my constituency, and in particularly police officers, are in danger of getting hurt if this goes wrong. We don't want a public order offence at all. You would agree with that, sir, and I hope your work with the Met to make sure that we keep Londoners safe during this very important visit.
Can I just be clear about this? Because I appreciate the sensitivity of a Conservative politician being concerned when I say London is an open city. I can understand the concern he may have when I say we've chosen unity over division and hope over fear, bearing in mind who his candidate was. But I'm really proud we did.
Okay. Assemblymember Boff.
Mr Mayor, after Assemblymember Curtin's contribution, do you wish that President Trump had paid a few more people to shut up?
Yes. Yes, that was quite funny. Is that it?
And do you welcome the particular aspect of the council elections in London, which saw the complete, total decimation of UKIP?
Well, when I used to be a lawyer, I'd say to clients the jury is nearly always right, and I think in the context of UKIP in London, the vote is always right.
Okay, thank you very much. And the final question is from Assemblymember Twycross on glass ceiling.
Can I thank you for your question? I'm a proud feminist, and that means backing up words with action. That's why I'm continuing to work to break down barriers and address the significant imbalance of opportunity that women face as they strive to advance in their careers. One of the ways to make strides in gender equality is to increase the representation of women in senior leadership positions. This year, through our Behind Every Great City campaign, we've been redoubling our efforts to fight for gender equality. We recently marked one of the main moments of the campaign with the unveiling of the statue of Millicent Fawcett in Parliament Square. It highlighted the huge strides that have been made towards gender equality, but also that there is much more that needs to be done. As part of our campaign, I've this week announced, and thank you for being there, the launch of the new initiative, Our Time Supporting Future Leaders. The development initiative being set up by City Hall will support women into leadership positions across London. The initiative will pair talented women with senior staff, men and women, to address the lack of support women can face in accessing networks, contacts and opportunities. I'm committed to influencing other employers across all sectors in London to tackle gender inequality. Through the Good Work Standard, we will support employers to adopt best practice and achieve high standards in areas such as workplace diversity, flexible working and skills development. We're also supporting women to obtain the skills and training to access the opportunities London has to offer across all sectors. Through our £7 million digital talent programme, we're ensuring that young women in particular have the digital and tech skills they need to access the growing jobs market in these sectors. I'll continue to lead by example. Since my arrival in May 2016, I've delivered on my commitment to increase gender diversity at board level across the GLA group. I've appointed women to a number of senior roles at City Hall, which includes 6 of the 10 deputy mayors, and I've published our gender pay gap data for the last 2 years, and this year all functional bodies are publishing action plans to close the gap across the group. We're also embedding the principles of an inclusive workplace by offering shared parental leave, flexible working and support with childcare through vouchers and the childcare deposit loan scheme. However, London still has the highest gender pay gap in the country, so there is clearly more work to be done to improve opportunities for women seeking leadership roles in London, and I won't stop until I see gender equality become a reality.
Thank you. And this week I finally got to see the Millicent Fawcett statue and was genuinely moved, much more so than I expect actually. Really significant symbol for women in the capital and across the UK. And I think, without wanting to prolong the previous question, I think we're all looking forward to having a feminist in the White House, putting actions behind words. And I just wondered how much importance you put on initiatives like Our Time, the pay audit, and advertising jobs on a flexible basis, both in changing culture here and influencing behaviour by their employers, and how much you think there's a need for changing legislation by the government to give women the right to flexible working, unless there's a compelling and actual genuine business need for those jobs not to be advertised flexibly.
Firstly, I don't think one policy by itself is a silver bullet. I think it's a combination of policies, but also changing behaviour. There's a great Martin Luther King quote where he said, when you can legislate to change the way people act, not the way people think. But over a period of time, by changing the way people act, it will change the way they think. And that's why legislation matters, because you're requiring people to change their behaviour over a period of time, because they have to. And over a period of time, it will change the way they behave. Equal Pay Act passed decades ago. We still have examples of gender pay gaps. Why? Because in the top positions, there are lots of blokes and not enough women, and the women that there are in the junior positions. And that's why our time is so important. What our time is about is helping those women with huge potential fulfill their potential, not just by mentoring. Mentoring's okay, I mentor many people, but actually this is about doing more than that. It's a formal structure where senior champions, men and women, will pair up with a woman with potential and give them access to their contacts, their networks, training to make sure they can apply for jobs. We've made sure, for example, now all the interview panels we have are gender diverse. But things like flexible working are so important because why should the onus be on the individual to ask for something? We had the discussion at previous MQTs where you, in the context of apprenticeships, you made the point, a very good point. Some people may be nervous to ask for a part-time apprenticeship. And so we've got to make it easy for you to ask for because it's a matter of course, and so it's really important.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Bacon.
It's a very important aim. Obviously, we are fully supportive of it. So, really recognise the achievements of the Conservative Party, Mr Mayor, which is the only political party ever to have elected 2 female Prime Ministers entirely on merit.
And you should be really proud. I mean, I've got 2 daughters, and you know, when Theresa May became the Prime Minister, I was proud, and I congratulate Theresa, and my daughters can see their Prime Minister is a woman. I mean, honestly, put aside party politics, I mean, the fact that our President is a woman matters. I mean, in a different context, it matters when our leader is meeting with other world leaders and she's a woman. And, you know, and by the way, you know, she does a really difficult job, and it shows. The Commissioner, the Prime Minister, the Fire Commissioner, NCA, these really difficult jobs have been done by women. And so when people say to me, oh, there aren't talented women around, I say, you're not looking hard enough, you're mixing the wrong circles, and you should be proud as a Conservative politician that you've had 2 leaders who are women.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you for your answers. Thank you. Would the Assembly please agree the motion set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Thank you very much. Will the Assembly please agree to hold an additional plenary meeting on Monday, 4th of June 2018 at 2 p.m, principally to hold a question and answer session with the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development on the draft housing strategy and formally consider that strategy? Agreed. Thank you. The date of the next meeting will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 2 o'clock on Monday, the 21st of May. That meeting will principally be used to hold a question and answer session with the Mayor and Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy on the draft environment strategy and formally consider that strategy. There is no urgent business requiring consideration. However, there is a briefing for members from the Trust for London at 1 o'clock in Committee Room 3.